Hello everyone, this is Fanfic Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
Curse Return. The Fukuro family's bloody revenge. Part 1. Toji carefully picked up the child who shared his bloodline. He did not sense the familiar cursed energy coming from the child, which surprised him slightly. Cursed energy is an innate ability possessed by a minority of people in this world. A rare hint of softness appeared on Toji's stern face, yet it was also incredibly complex. He carefully examined the child. The child's skin was as fair as snow, his eyes bright like stars, and his small mouth was slightly open, seemingly smiling at him. Toji felt an emotion he had never experienced before. It felt strange, yet immensely warm. How ironic. Since you didn't inherit the heavenly restriction and can live a slightly easier life, I'll call you Shin. Toji said softly. He decided to name the child Shin, hoping he would live cautiously. It would be good if he didn't have to go through what Toji had, and could instead live an ordinary, happy life. Shin quickly understood that he had arrived in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, and Toji, standing before him, was now his father. This was also the first time Shin had a family, giving his new life a different meaning. You idiot, stop right now. Fushiguro Megumi shouted at Itadori. But in the next second, Itadori, who had swallowed one of Sukuna's fingers, effortlessly annihilated the cursed spirit merely by swinging his right hand. Sukuna was thrilled to possess a physical body again. Ha 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 ha, having a body is truly the best. Killing cursed spirits' bodies is too boring. Where are the people? The women? A figure instantly appeared beside Sukuna. It was Fushiguro Shin. Black short hair and that iconic handsome face inherited from his father, Toji. Even Sukuna was surprised by Fushiguro Shin's speed, yet he sensed no cursed energy from Shin. Fushiguro Shin gathered all his strength into his right fist and swung it at Itadori, whose body was controlled by Sukuna, at astonishing speed, roaring. You freak! Stay away from my little brother. The moment Shin's fist connected with Sukuna's body, a massive boom echoed throughout the night sky. Sukuna was sent flying like a cannonball, instantly slamming heavily into the wall of the nearby school building. As huge clouds of dust rose, a second loud crash was heard. Fushiguro Megumi stared blankly at his older brother before uttering a single word after a long pause. Bro. Fushiguro Shin suppressed his anger and lectured Fushiguro Megumi, pointing at him. Megumi. I should have told you not to go on missions without me. Shin left half a sentence unsaid, especially regarding matters involving special grade cursed objects. It was at this moment that the system's voice rang out. Interrupting Sukuna's revival speech grants 100 experience points. Seeing his heavily injured, foolish younger brother, Fushiguro Megumi, Fushiguro Shin's anger subsided significantly. He is currently controlled by a special grade cursed object. I'll handle the exorcism from here. Although Fushiguro Megumi was aware of his older brother's strength, the person was controlled by a special grade cursed object, and their power might have been elevated to special grade level. Bro, if you can't manage, I'll use that to stall him. Fushiguro Shin snapped. I told you to practice that early, not to use it casually before you've fully mastered it. Before Fushiguro Shin could finish speaking, he charged out and engaged Sukuna in close combat. Just as the close combat reached a fever pitch, Itadori regained control of his body. What are you doing with someone else's body, you fool? Give it back to me. Sukuna was momentarily stunned, having not expected Itadori's consciousness to still be present. Even the pure black cursed markings on his face faded due to the shift in control. Sukuna thought to himself, I'm being suppressed by the host of this body. This brat's strength is terrifyingly high. If this continues, I'll be at a disadvantage. Fushiguro Megumi, watching from afar, was also greatly surprised. Only after hearing Itadori's words did he realize Itadori hadn't died from possession. Hearing Itadori's voice, after confirming that Fushiguro Shin had seen him, Fushiguro Shin's true expression emerged. It was a monstrous killing intent, aimed at utterly slaughtering the villains who would harm his family in the future. Consuming 100 experience points, reverse heavenly restriction temporarily upgrades to two-way heavenly restriction, limited to 10 seconds. The heavenly restriction Fushiguro Shin possessed was the same reverse heavenly restriction as Toji's. Almost zero cursed energy, granting resistance to cursed energy and terrifying physical enhancement. The so-called two-way heavenly restriction allows Fushiguro Shin to briefly possess the effects of a positive heavenly restriction simultaneously with the reverse heavenly restriction. The effect of this positive heavenly restriction is to gain an equivalent level of cursed energy based on physical strength. The cost is the experience points Fushiguro Shin gained by building good relationships with main characters and changing their life trajectories. Fushiguro Shin spoke in a voice so icy cold that only Itadori and Sukuna in front of him could hear it. You've been a great help. Sukuna, inside Itadori's body, was also extremely surprised to sense Fushiguro Shin's instantly soaring cursed energy. During the brief fight, Sukuna had basically confirmed that the young man's physical strength was a result of the rare heavenly restriction. However, to instantly boost cursed energy from almost zero to a terrifying level without using cursed techniques or domains was something even he had rarely seen. Sukuna discovered something about Fushiguro Shin that attracted him. Interesting. Fushiguro Shin's right hand transformed into a hand blade, and the dense cursed energy covering it turned black. It instantly pierced Itadori's flesh, specifically the stomach area, which is a digestive organ. When Fushiguro Shin retracted his hand, he did not pull out the finger, the symbol of Sukuna's power, that he had anticipated. Itadori's massive wound gushed a large amount of blood, and he weakly knelt on the ground. Since I can't end this by extracting the finger, I can only ask you to die. Just hate me, I can't let go of anyone who might harm Megumi. Severely injuring Itadori grants 100 experience points. Killing one finger Sukuna grants 100,000 experience points. Consuming 100 experience points, reverse heavenly restriction temporarily upgrades to two-way heavenly restriction, limited to 10 seconds. Wait, bro. Don't kill him. Fushiguro Megumi shouted upon seeing how the situation was developing. But Fushiguro Shin paid no attention. To avoid the future that was set to occur, he was determined to nip the dangerous element in the bud, just as he had saved Sumiki Fushiguro. As long as his family could be safe, he wouldn't hesitate to dirty his own hands. This time, Fushiguro Shin's black flash was aimed at Itadori's heart. Your killing intent is too heavy, Shin. So you also show this kind of killing intent toward beings other than me. Fushiguro Shin, walking home, stopped. Fushiguro Megumi asked curiously, what's wrong, big brother? Fushiguro Shin turned around and looked at Gojo Satoru, the man who could currently be called the strongest in the jujutsu world. So, what do you want by stalking two elementary school students? Are you not even going to spare grade schoolers? Gojo Satoru looked at Fushiguro Shin, who was clearly hostile towards him, and recalled the scene 3 years ago in front of Toji's corpse. Fushiguro Shin, who was only 3 years old, was actually able to pull out the inverted spear of heaven that was stuck in the ground. And his face held the same expression, anger mixed with sorrow. Fushiguro Shin only said 5 words. I will kill you. Even though 3 years had passed, Gojo Satoru could still confirm that this was Toji's eldest son, Fushiguro Shin, and the one behind him with a bewildered expression must be Fushiguro Megumi. Fushiguro Megumi frowned and asked, who are you? And stop wearing that disgusting smile. Gojo Satoru touched the corner of his mouth, finally dropping his smile. He adjusted his sunglasses and said, although your personalities are very different, you look quite similar. You truly are his children. Fushiguro Megumi looked suspiciously at the questionable Gojo Satoru before him. Gojo Satoru waved his hand and spoke. My apologies, that was just me talking to myself. Don't worry about it. Gojo Satoru crouched down, looking at Fushiguro Megumi, who was being protected, and said. You're Fushiguro Megumi, right? Your father came from the Zenin family, a prestigious jujutsu sorcerer clan, but he was a scumbag even I couldn't stand. He only had you two after leaving the family. Since you can see cursed spirits, you must be very talented. You must have realized your own power, haven't you? As Gojo Satoru said this, he glanced at Fushiguro Shin beside him. After all, compared to Fushiguro Megumi's cursed technique talent, the power Fushiguro Shin inherited from Toji could also be called talent. Fushiguro Megumi and Fushiguro Shin merely watched Gojo Satoru gesticulating wildly, their expressions cold. The Zenin family absolutely loves talented children. Jujutsu sorcerers usually awaken their cursed technique between the ages of 6 and 8, so they are often bought and sold during this age range. And you, Megumi, you are the strongest trump card your father left behind to deal with the Zenin family. That's quite infuriating, isn't it? And then your father was killed by me. Fushiguro Shin stepped forward at this moment and roared sternly at Gojo Satoru. Enough. Don't say anything more. Don't drag Megumi into this is between the two of us. Fushiguro Megumi, however, spoke indifferently. It doesn't matter. I haven't seen him in years anyway, and I only know about him through my brother. I don't care how he is or what he's doing wherever he is. Hearing what you said, I can probably guess, Sumiki's mother hasn't been home for a while either. We must be useless now, so perhaps they both went off to live a good life by themselves. Seeing Fushiguro Megumi's indifferent expression while being protected behind Fushiguro Shin, Gojo Satoru was certain, Fushiguro Shin had not told his brother about that matter. Did he choose to hide their father's death to protect his brother? He's truly precocious. Compared to Megumi, who is mature for his age, Shin seems completely like an adult, doesn't he? Gojo Satoru thought this to himself. Sumiki Fushiguro also noticed the two returning and shouted from the second floor window. Shin and Megumi are back. Gojo Satoru stood up, his gaze sweeping over the two brothers as he spoke. Well, your father's story is quite interesting. If you ever want to know, you can ask me anytime. But judging by Fushiguro Shin's stance, he definitely wouldn't let Fushiguro Megumi find out the truth, and he himself would certainly never seek information from Gojo Satoru. Gojo Satoru, understanding this, naturally had no interest in wasting more time on the matter and asked straightforwardly. So, Megumi, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to the Zenin family? Fushiguro Megumi glanced at Fushiguro Shin's back and asked seriously. If I go to the Zenin family, what will happen to Big Brother and Sumiki? Will they be happy? That's the main point. Gojo Satoru replied instantly and coldly, without needing to think. Absolutely, 100% no. I can state that right now. Toji, who lacked cursed energy, was already a tragedy, and Fushiguro Shin would only be repeating the tragic old path. As for Sumiki, there's no need to elaborate. A female who also lacks cursed energy will only meet a tragic end. Having received an affirmative answer, Fushiguro Megumi's face instinctively showed disgust and confusion about what to do next. Having received Fushiguro Megumi's answer, Gojo Satoru's expression softened. Okay, I understand. I'll handle things from now on. But let me warn you, you might have a hard time. Work hard and get stronger, strong enough that I won't abandon you. And now, it's your turn, Shin. Gojo Satoru turned to Fushiguro Shin, thinking that this precocious kid should be able to communicate normally. He pulled Fushiguro Shin aside and said, what I gave Megumi was a choice, but for you, it's an order. Come to my side, obediently. Fushiguro Shin said decisively, I refuse. Fushiguro Shin, who had awakened his system, originally planned to walk in the shadows, accumulate power, and prepare for a long-term revenge and reckoning. Gojo Satoru sensed a radically different aura emanating from Fushiguro Shin compared to Fushiguro Megumi, as if he were another Toji in the making. He had personally experienced what this power meant for Jujutsu. Gojo Satoru looked down at Fushiguro Shin, revealing the sapphire-like Raikugan, six eyes, azure sky pupils behind his sunglasses. I can't just let you go. Your father's dying wish was to leave you two for me to deal with as I saw fit. Fushiguro Shin stared at those strongest eyes, asking without the slightest retreat. Even if I swear to kill you, you still intend to take me? Gojo Satoru returned to his confident tone. It's fine, go ahead and try. I am the strongest, but until you accomplish that, you must listen to me. Thus began the twisted teacher-student relationship between Fushiguro Shin and Gojo Satoru. After that black flash was blocked by Gojo Satoru, Itadori's consciousness sank due to severe injuries, and Sukuna regained control of the body. The wound caused by the previous black flash was healing at a visible speed. This signaled that Fushiguro Shin had lost his best chance to kill Sukuna. Fushiguro Shin clicked his tongue internally. Sukuna twisted his neck, a cruel smile appearing on his face, and launched an attack on Gojo Satoru and Fushiguro Shin. Seriously, no matter what era it is, jujutsu sorcerers are still so annoying. Behave yourself. Let me show off a little in front of my students. But Fushiguro Shin and Gojo Satoru reacted almost simultaneously, both punching Sukuna and sending him flying. Gojo Satoru opened his mouth and asked, "So what's the situation now?" "Hold this for me. I should mention beforehand, it's not a souvenir, it's something I plan to eat on the Shinkansen when we go back." As Gojo Satoru spoke, he handed the Kikufuku in his hand over to Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin didn't want to miss this kind of opportunity, one that could change the plot and earn experience, so he tossed it backward to Fushiguro Megumi and explained. That person swallowed a special grade cursed object, and he is clearly being controlled by the cursed object now. That's why you judged that he needed to be exorcised. Right, when did you master Black Flash? Facing Gojo Satoru's question, Fushiguro Shin chose silence. But Gojo Satoru didn't press the issue, he just smiled slightly and said. It looks like you haven't wasted any time. You've been diligently getting stronger to defeat me. Fushiguro Shin corrected him, not defeat. Kill. Gojo Satoru casually twisted his neck and said, it doesn't matter. Anyway, you can't do it. Just relax and be a jujutsu sorcerer. From Gojo Satoru's perspective, Fushiguro Shin was undoubtedly qualified as a jujutsu sorcerer, aside from the killing intent he harbored due to the vengeance for his father. Whether on missions or interacting with others at Tokyo Jujutsu High, he hadn't displayed the antisocial tendencies of his father. On the contrary, he was quite a well-liked guy. Itadori, who had finally regained control of his body, rose from the ruins. Itadori raised his hands high and shouted, "Wait a minute. I've already controlled that guy." Fushiguro Shin frowned slightly, surprised that Itadori had managed to regain control so quickly. Gojo Satoru flashed and appeared in front of Itadori, carefully sensing the aura around him. How interesting. It seems they really have merged. As Gojo Satoru spoke, he tapped Itadori's forehead, and Itadori immediately lost consciousness and collapsed. So what did you do? Fushiguro Megumi asked, looking at Itadori collapsed in Gojo Satoru's arms. Gojo Satoru explained. Nothing much, just made him pass out. If he wakes up and his body still hasn't been taken over by Sukuna, he might be able to serve as a vessel. Fushiguro Shin knew that Gojo Satoru had discovered Itadori's potential as a vessel, making it difficult to change his mind. He had lost the chance to weaken one of Sukuna's fingers. But Fushiguro Shin still tried, directly stating the risk clearly. No matter what, he has the potential to lose control, which means we risk facing a special grade at any time. From that perspective, there's no reason to keep him alive, right? After all, according to jujutsu regulations, this guy should be executed. Gojo Satoru didn't refute him, asking calmly, that's true. So, how should we handle this next? Fushiguro Megumi naturally understood such an obvious matter, but Itadori's performance during the previous battle was still vivid in his mind. A conflicted look inevitably appeared on Fushiguro Megumi's face. I know all that, but I still hope he doesn't have to die. Since my adorable student has asked me, I'll take care of the rest. As Gojo Satoru spoke, he looked toward Fushiguro Shin. The meaning was clear, it was time for him to obey. Fushiguro Shin sighed, reluctantly accepting this outcome. After all, it was a request from his own younger brother, so he had nothing more to say. Currently, Sukuna was only at the level of one finger, and there was still a long time before future events, giving Fushiguro Shin enough time to prepare. In reality, Fushiguro Shin was still conflicted about whether to allow the Shibuya incident to happen. If it happened, it would undoubtedly be an opportunity to reverse destiny, earn experience, and rapidly increase his strength. Conversely, preventing it would at least ensure the survival of the majority, allowing for steady, long-term development. He would take things one step at a time. Fushiguro Megumi carefully said to Fushiguro Shin, "Sorry, big bro." Fushiguro Shin ruffled Fushiguro Megumi's hair and said, "What are you talking about? It's fine as long as you're safe. Hurry up and treat your wounds." Name: Fushiguro Shin. Race: Human. Title: Grade 3 Sorcerer. Physique: Semi-first grade, 8,000 10,000ths. Perception: Second grade, 105 thousandths. Cursed energy: Third grade, 485 hundredths. Mastered abilities: Black Flash, Third grade, 355 hundredths. Reverse Heavenly Restriction. Special grade upgrades to two-way Heavenly Restriction. Lasts 10 seconds per 100 experience points. Divergent Fist. Third grade, 255 hundredths. Cursed Technique. Unlocks when cursed energy is raised to semi-first grade. Domain. Unlocks along with cursed energy. Ability grades are divided into 4th grade, 3rd grade, semi-second grade, 2nd grade, semi-first grade, 1st grade, special grade, and super special grade. Down pointing arrow click to expand the character affinity interface. The cursed energy stat was intentionally suppressed by Fushiguro Shin. Because if he increased his cursed energy, it would inevitably be noticed by others. After all, he wasn't the only one at Tokyo Jujutsu High with a heavenly restriction. Maintaining high cursed energy while also having extremely high physical strength would only arouse suspicion from others. Moreover, as soon as he activates the two-way heavenly restriction, he can temporarily boost his cursed energy to semi-first grade, matching his physical body. This is why Fushiguro Shin is temporarily not considering raising his cursed energy. Although awakening a cursed technique would significantly increase his fighting ability, maximizing the advantages of the two-way heavenly restriction is currently the most cost-effective option. The secret that he can unleash a burst of cursed energy in a short time is currently only known to Gojo Satoru and Fushiguro Megumi. In the eyes of everyone else at Tokyo Jujutsu High, Fushiguro Shin was just an existence similar to Maki Zenin. He saw Itadori again after Itadori had spoken alone with Gojo Satoru and swallowed a second Sukuna's finger. Fushiguro Megumi, walking down the road, happened to ask Fushiguro Shin, "Why did you have such intense killing intent toward Itadori, big bro? In my memory, you aren't like that, and I've never seen you act this way on previous missions." Just then, the two ran into Itadori speaking to Gojo Satoru. "I'll eat all of Sukuna's fingers. What happens after that, I don't care. I've already decided how I'm going to die." Itadori happened to turn his head and saw Fushiguro Megumi and Fushiguro Shin walking toward him. The moment he saw Fushiguro Shin, remembering the assault that almost killed him, his body involuntarily shuddered, showing fear. Fushiguro Shin considered that since the annihilation route was no longer viable, the optimal solution now was to increase the other party's affinity. He sighed and explained, "I personally have no prejudice against you. My desire to kill you was only aimed at the dangerous thing inside your body." Itadori Affinity +1. Gained 100 experience points. After all, Itadori had learned more about Sukuna from Gojo Satoru, and having personally experienced Sukuna's malice, he could understand Fushiguro Shin's meaning. Itadori could imagine how many innocent lives Sukuna would take if he were unrestrained. Fushiguro Shin extended his hand to Itadori and continued, "Fushiguro Shin, Megumi's older brother. From now on, we are comrades." Itadori didn't hesitate and shook Fushiguro Shin's hand. "Itadori Yuji." Fushiguro Shin added, "But let me make this clear beforehand. If you completely lose control and become a monster, I will not rule out stopping you, even if it means killing you, before your hands are stained with more sin." Itadori was stunned by these words. Gojo Satoru smiled slightly. Although he hadn't heard Fushiguro Shin say this to anyone else, this was definitely Fushiguro Shin's style. Fushiguro Megumi facepalmed and complained, Brother, didn't you already decide to let him off? Don't say things like that with such a straight face. Fushiguro Shin released Itadori's hand. My apologies. Those words were just my way of saying I hope you do well. Itadori affection level increased to 2. Gained 100 experience points. Itadori looked at his hand suspended in midair, thinking about what Gojo Satoru had just told him, that surviving a curse attack with a complete body was considered lucky. And if his body were taken over by Sukuna, he would become the perpetrator causing such misfortune. Itadori no longer found Fushiguro Shin's words so jarring. On the contrary, he could sense Fushiguro Shin's goodwill toward him through those twisted words. If that day truly came, perhaps even if he went to hell, his sins would be slightly fewer. Itadori thought this because, currently, he had no real sense of the sins Sukuna might commit. Itadori affection level increased to 3. Gained 100 experience points. Of course, Fushiguro Shin couldn't possibly know Itadori's mental journey. He was only surprised that Itadori's affection level had inexplicably risen again. The next day, as per routine, Gojo Satoru had Itadori undergo Principal Yaga's test. Fushiguro Megumi was resting and receiving treatment for his injuries, so only Fushiguro Shin came along. Fushiguro Shin had absolutely no interest in the scene playing out between Yaga and Itadori, which was exactly the same as he remembered. There was no opportunity to change anything about this test, and even if there were, it wouldn't matter much. Meanwhile, Gojo Satoru, standing nearby, recalled the scene when Fushiguro Shin took the test. When faced with Yaga's question, "Why did you come to Jujutsu High?" Fushiguro Shin's answer was simple: to become stronger. Yaga looked at Fushiguro Shin in front of him and continued to ask, "After you understand curses and cursed techniques for exercising them, and you become stronger, what do you want to do?" Fushiguro Shin glanced at Fushiguro Megumi standing next to Gojo Satoru behind him, and then spoke to Yaga. "I apologize, but for personal reasons, I cannot comment on that question." Yaga frowned, glanced at Gojo Satoru not far away, and internally grumbled, "What's with this kid? Gojo said he was strong and I should go all out, but what kind of answer is this?" Yaga stood up and said coldly. "Unacceptable. No comment, is not the answer I want. Let me see if you can still be so stubborn when you're cornered." Having said that, he controlled 2 puppets, a green kappa and a white cat, to attack Fushiguro Shin. But what Yaga hadn't expected was that before the 2 puppets could attack Fushiguro Shin and test how strong Gojo Satoru claimed he was, Fushiguro Shin struck first. The 2 puppets instantly lost their target, as Fushiguro Shin appeared before Yaga in the blink of an eye. Yaga was startled internally. How was he so fast? Although Fushiguro Shin's ability points weren't high at the moment, relying on the amplification of the reverse heavenly restriction, he was already a Superman. Fushiguro Shin didn't waste words and delivered a flying kick straight to Yaga's head. Even though Yaga used his hands to defend, the immense force of the kick still sent him staggering back several meters. His glasses fell messily to the ground, revealing eyes filled with a mix of shock and fury. He had never encountered anyone who just started beating him up without distinction. Logically speaking, when facing the entrance exam conducted by the principal of Jujutsu High, this option shouldn't even occur in a normal person's mind, right? Fushiguro Megumi was dumbfounded. Why did his brother just start hitting the principal without a word? Gojo Satoru wasn't surprised. This was indeed something the Fushiguro Shin he knew would do. He just found the bewildered Yaga rather amusing. But more than that, seeing Gojo Satoru suppressing his laughter nearby made Yaga even more furious. Yaga shook his numb arm and asked in a deep voice, "Fushiguro Shin, right? Can you explain what exactly you are doing right now?" "Trying to satisfy you, principal, by displaying my strength." Seeing Yaga's look of disbelief, Fushiguro Shin sighed and added, "Fine. Actually, I was planning to knock you out with one blow so I wouldn't have to answer the question." Gojo Satoru finally burst out laughing. Yaga snapped, "Stop laughing. Why is this question something you were unwilling to answer, even to the point of choosing to try and defeat me?" Fushiguro Shin's reaction made Yaga realize there might be some hidden circumstances, making him even more curious. Not this question. At least, I cannot answer you here. Yaga put his glasses back on, and behind him, a crowd of puppets of all sizes began to come alive. Yaga said to Fushiguro Shin, "Is that so? Well, today I'm going to pry the answer out of you." Facing the high-intensity siege from the puppet swarm and Yaga, Fushiguro Shin managed to hold out for over 20 minutes without being defeated. After the battle, Yaga was basically certain that Fushiguro Shin's powerful body and weak cursed energy were undoubtedly due to the influence of heavenly restriction. He hadn't expected to encounter a second case of heavenly restriction at Jujutsu High. Yaga looked at Fushiguro Shin, who was now breathing heavily, and spoke again. "You are indeed impressive. Answer that question for me, and I will consider you qualified." "Ha. Ha. I refuse." Fushiguro Shin's stubbornness reached a point where Yaga couldn't help but ask, "What exactly are you holding out for?" At this moment, Gojo Satoru clapped his hands and walked out, saying to Yaga, all right. Let me answer that question for you instead." Outside the room, Yaga learned the whole story from Gojo Satoru. Having understood the twisted relationship and why Fushiguro Shin adamantly refused to answer in front of Fushiguro Megumi, Yaga looked at Gojo Satoru with a strange expression and whispered. "How absurd." Yaga subsequently became the only person, besides Gojo Satoru, who knew about their relationship. Following the end of the fight, Yaga officially welcomed Yuji Itadori to Tokyo Jujutsu High. Fushiguro Shin, meanwhile, kicked away the puppet that Yaga had forgotten to deactivate, helped Yuji Itadori up, and offered a compliment. "As expected of Principal Yaga, your curse technique seems to have gotten stronger again." "What is it, Shin? Do you want me to check how much you've grown recently?" Fushiguro Shin made a gesture of surrender. "Please spare me. How could I possibly be a match for Principal Yaga?" Yaga said exasperatedly, "You brat, Shin." Originally, when Yaga agreed to Gojo Satoru's request to admit Fushiguro Shin into Tokyo Jujutsu High, even with Gojo Satoru's guarantee, he was still somewhat worried. He worried whether Fushiguro Shin, who was suppressing such things in his heart, would become a dangerous element. However, after spending some time together, Yaga was surprised to find out. Not only were his worries unnecessary, but Fushiguro Shin actually got along well with everyone at Tokyo Jujutsu High, appearing like a good-natured person trying to please everyone. After all, Fushiguro Shin was not yet ready to show everyone the cold arrogance and wild ambition buried beneath that facade. "Alright, hurry up and take Yuji Itadori to the dorms." The next day, the four people waiting for Nobara Kugisaki and Sugawara, Fushiguro Megumi looked at the instant camera hanging from Fushiguro Shin's chest and asked. "What are you doing with that, brother?" It's a second-hand instant camera. Want to take a picture?" Gojo Satoru, feeling intrigued, pulled Yuji Itadori closer. "Then let's take one together, the few of us." Only after Fushiguro Shin pressed the shutter did Fushiguro Megumi continue. "I know it's a camera. I was just curious that you would buy something other than a cursed tool, brother." Although Fushiguro Shin possessed heavenly restriction and immense physical strength, exercising cursed spirits and curses ultimately relied on cursed energy. Compared to relying on consuming experience points to activate two-way heavenly restriction for every exorcism, cursed tools were more cost-effective. However, Toji's inverted spear of heaven had been instantly destroyed the moment Fushiguro Shin pulled it out and aimed it at Gojo Satoru. After all, the inverted spear of heaven was indeed a special-grade cursed tool capable of harming Gojo Satoru. In the subsequent days, Gojo Satoru had no intention of providing assistance in this regard. The only time Fushiguro Shin asked, Gojo Satoru's answer was, "Although I really want to give you a cursed tool that can defeat me, unfortunately, such a thing doesn't exist." Fushiguro Shin already knew that he couldn't take advantage of Gojo Satoru in this matter. Furthermore, he never thought he could defeat Gojo Satoru with just cursed tools, they were mostly just for dealing with daily missions. After that, Fushiguro Shin began a life of high-intensity mission acceptance and earning money. Thanks to this experience, he was able to go on missions with various jujutsu sorcerers and increase their favorability towards him. Of course, the money wasn't just used to buy cheap cursed tools as consumables. Fushiguro Shin also sent a portion of the money to Sumiki monthly for living expenses. Although Fushiguro Shin avoided Sumiki's tragedy, it didn't change the fact that Sumiki was an ordinary person and couldn't act alongside him and Fushiguro Megumi. Therefore, Fushiguro Shin would try his best to provide more financial support. Fushiguro Shin merely smiled slightly and said, "After all, besides exorcising cursed spirits, there are many other things to do." It was exactly at this moment that they noticed. Across the road, Nobara Kugasaki was being pestered by a headhunter scouting for models. Compared to Yuji Itadori and Fushiguro Megumi, who felt slightly awkward, Gojo Satoru directly called Nobara Kugasaki over to gather. "Hey, Kugasaki, over here." Once Nobara Kugasaki arrived before them carrying bags of various sizes, Gojo Satoru suggested. "Let's start with introductions first." Nobara Kugasaki put one hand on her hip and introduced herself to everyone. "I am Nobara Kugasaki. You boys should be happy, I'm the only splash of red among all the green." Fushiguro Megumi clearly found this arrogant tone troublesome, but he could only complain silently to himself. After all, they would be classmates, and just thinking about it felt bothersome. Yuji Itadori pointed to himself and introduced himself proactively. "I'm Yuji Itadori, and I'm from Sendai." Fushiguro Megumi merely spoke coldly. "Fushiguro Megumi." Nobara Kugasaki looked at the people in front of her, concluding that Yuji Itadori was a country bumpkin, and labeling Fushiguro Megumi as conceited. When Nobara Kugasaki's gaze fell upon Fushiguro Shin extended his hand to Nobara Kugasaki and spoke. "My name is Fushiguro Shin, Megumi's older brother. Miss Kugasaki, you've traveled a long way, let me carry those things for you." "Oh, you don't have to bother, I was planning to check them in." Although Nobara Kugasaki said this, her body was honest and she handed the bags over to Fushiguro Shin. Nobara Kugasaki favorability increased to 1. Gained 100 experience. And Fushiguro Shin's image, which had been a distorted stick figure in Nobara Kugasaki's eyes, became slightly more complete. Looking closely, they really do look alike, but the older brother is much more. Just as Nobara Kugasaki was muttering to herself mentally, Fushiguro Shin spoke. "I didn't realize your interest was modeling, Miss Kugasaki. Would you mind if I took a picture of you now?" "Of course. Is this pose okay?" Nobara Kugasaki favorability increased to 5. Gained 500 experience. Yuji Itadori suddenly felt unaccustomed to Fushiguro Shin, who had fought him fiercely earlier, acting this way now. Gojo Satoru was long accustomed to Fushiguro Shin's style, so he didn't find it strange. Fushiguro Megumi watched Fushiguro Shin, who was chatting happily with Nobara Kugasaki, and he could still feel that sense of incongruity. In his eyes, his older brother was always able to perfectly charm girls, yet he never intended to develop intimate relationships. Some people who confessed their feelings to Fushiguro Shin were even politely rejected. After seeing this many times, Fushiguro Megumi realized that Fushiguro Shin was treating everyone equally, using the exact same approach. Fushiguro Megumi felt as if Fushiguro Shin was born into this world specifically to become a person like this. It was also thanks to his older brother that Fushiguro Megumi received considerable attention under the title of Fushiguro Shin's younger brother. And because Fushiguro Megumi was well protected by Fushiguro Shin, he never questioned his older brother, since Fushiguro Shin always managed to solve problems effectively. After a round of conversation, Nobara Kugasaki's favorability towards Fushiguro Shin rose to level 10, earning him a significant amount of experience points. Fushiguro Shin couldn't help but sigh that the initial meeting was always the easiest time to raise favorability. After that, it slowed down considerably. But he was still short of something. Fushiguro Shin was waiting for a later opportunity, a chance to face Ryomen Sukuna alone, to test his domain. After all, the Shibuya incident was not far away, and it was necessary to confirm the methods he could use in advance to start planning. Then the four of them were tricked by Satoru Gojo into going to Roppongi to exorcise curses. Watching Satoru Gojo arrange for Yuji Itadori and Nobara Kugasaki to perform the exorcism, Shin Fushiguro asked Satoru Gojo, "Don't I need to follow them? If Yuji Itadori loses control, Nobara Kugasaki won't be able to handle it, right?" Satoru Gojo glanced sideways at Shin Fushiguro and Megumi Fushiguro as he replied. From Megumi Fushiguro's expression, he was thinking something similar. That's true, but Megumi has only just recovered. And if you go, Shin, I'd be very troubled if you killed Yuji Itadori. Shin Fushiguro didn't like Satoru Gojo's joke and retorted, "I'm not as bloodthirsty as you say." Satoru Gojo said with a smile. "Just a joke. With your personality, you definitely wouldn't be able to help yourself from stepping in, and then there'd be no way to test the two of them. Besides, the protagonist this time is Nobara Kugasaki." What Satoru Gojo was referring to was, of course, Shin Fushiguro's various actions of stepping in for Megumi Fushiguro out of indulgence, and to increase favorability. Shin Fushiguro didn't deny it. If Satoru Gojo had agreed to let him go, what he really wanted to do was indeed earn favorability and experience points. In the time it took for the three to chat, Yuji Itadori and Nobara Kugasaki had perfectly finished the mission, just as in Shin Fushiguro's memory. After a brief month of Jujutsu high life, the four received the cursed womb must die incident that Shin Fushiguro had been waiting for. In front of the juvenile detention center, Kiyotaka Eijichi was introducing the mission information to the four of them. And he repeatedly emphasized that their mission did not include the option of fighting. Upon entering the building, Shin Fushiguro immediately spoke to everyone. In the worst-case scenario, if we encounter a special grade cursed spirit, Megumi, you and Nobara Kugasaki run together. Yuji Itadori and I will be responsible for stalling for time. This also avoided Yuji Itadori and Megumi Fushiguro arguing over the corpse of a juvenile delinquent, shortening the wasted time as much as possible. After all, if possible, Shin Fushiguro still wanted to keep everyone together so that he could protect them more easily. No matter how fast he was, it would be difficult to attend to crises occurring in multiple locations simultaneously. Whether it was because of his obsession with helping others or because he himself treated Sukuna as his own power, Yuji Itadori had no objections to Shin Fushiguro's arrangement. Megumi Fushiguro, most of the time, was habitually and unconditionally trusting of his older brother's arrangements. Nobara Kugasaki was about to raise a question as to why she was being arranged this way. Because Shin Fushiguro had not shown strength far exceeding the others to Nobara Kugasaki in their daily lives. That was why Nobara Kugasaki had certain doubts about Shin Fushiguro's arrangement. Beneath the feet of Shin Fushiguro and Nobara Kugasaki, a cursed spirit's teleportation technique appeared simultaneously. Shin Fushiguro had ultimately miscalculated one thing. He didn't expect that because of his low cursed technique level, he would be targeted for teleportation and predation along with Nobara Kugasaki as a weakling. What's going on? It's pitch black, I can't see anything. Nobara Kugasaki muttered softly. In the next second, she felt numerous curse reactions. She immediately pulled out her hammer and nails, making combat preparations. Although she had expectations in her heart, she was still startled looking at the terrifying number of cursed spirits before her. Shin Fushiguro also looked around, observing these dozen or so cursed spirits of various forms. An eerie mushroom with eyes growing on its cap, a huge and ugly toad, and countless strange masks and eyeballs floating in the air. By Shin Fushiguro's rough perception, they were at least third-grade cursed spirits, with quite a few second grades mixed in. This was indeed not something Nobara Kugasaki, who hadn't been enrolled for long, could handle alone. Shin Fushiguro said to Nobara Kugasaki, that special grade should be over with Megumi and Yuji Itadori. Since we're in a hurry, can you leave all of these to me, Nobara Kugasaki? Huh? Are you okay with this many? Nobara Kugasaki was slightly stunned. Although she had taken some missions with Shin Fushiguro during this time, she hadn't witnessed Shin Fushiguro's true strength. After all, Shin Fushiguro had always been suppressing his power to prevent his grade from rising too quickly, which would reduce the opportunities to grind favorability in multi-person missions. Nobara Kugasaki had just finished speaking when she felt something moving rapidly around her, bringing a strong wind. Every time that sensation appeared, it caused many surrounding curses to lose their reactions, and occasionally, the unpleasant wails of curses could be heard. Shin. Nobara Kugasaki murmured in disbelief. It was at this moment that the strongest toad-cursed spirit targeted Nobara Kugasaki, opening its bloody maw and preparing to swallow her from behind. But as Nobara Kugasaki reacted and turned her head, she heard Shin Fushiguro's voice by her ear. Lack of focus during battle is a major taboo, Nobara Kugasaki. Nobara Kugasaki only saw a flash of a blade as Shin Fushiguro split the toad-cursed spirit in two with a single strike. The toad-cursed spirit's massive body crashed heavily beside the two of them. Her eyes having adapted to the darkness, Nobara Kugasaki finally saw the surrounding scene clearly. The dismembered corpses of countless cursed spirits lay around, and Shin Fushiguro and she were the only things in this area that could be called living. Shin Fushiguro sheathed the katana cursed tool in his hand, which had a pitch-black blade and was named Cursed Tool, and pulled a tissue from his pocket, pointing to Nobara Kugasaki's cheek. There's a bit of blood right about here. You're not hurt, are you? Nobara Kugasaki's favorability has risen to 23. Gained 200 experience points. Nobara Kugasaki wiped away the blood and immediately followed up with a question. No, that's not the point. Since when were you this strong? Even stronger than Megumi. Shin Fushiguro smiled and replied, so that's how you evaluate me. It's common sense for an older brother to be stronger than his younger brother. After all, protecting family can sometimes be a bit rough. What are you doing being so rough? Ah. To save time, Shin Fushiguro directly hoisted Nobara Kugasaki onto his shoulder and ran toward the special grade cursed spirit's location based on memory and perception. On the way, they encountered Megumi Fushiguro, who was moving quickly using new. Brother. Shin Fushiguro tossed Nobara Kugasaki to Megumi Fushiguro and said quickly. From your expression, Yuji Itadori must have run into the special grade, right? Yes. A complicated expression appeared on Megumi Fushiguro's face. Shin Fushiguro patted Megumi Fushiguro's shoulder and quickly instructed. Take Nobara Kugasaki and leave first. I'll find a way to handle things on Yuji Itadori's side. Nobara Kugasaki and Megumi Fushiguro grabbed Shin Fushiguro's clothes almost simultaneously. That's a special grade, brother. I'm going too. Don't try to be a hero alone. Shin Fushiguro turned back, seeing the worry in their eyes, and simply replied seriously. Leave it to me. No one will die here. Domain expansion. Malevolent shrine. The moment Sukuna used his domain, the special grade cursed spirit in front of him was sliced into countless pieces. I only intended to cut you into 3 pieces. You really are weak. Just as Sukuna was muttering to himself, intending to step forward and take his finger from the cursed spirit's body, a cold voice rang out in the empty environment. Physical points have increased beyond 10,000. Physicality upgraded to first grade. Consumed experience points to activate two-way heavenly restriction. Cursed energy has reached first grade. Unlocking cursed technique in domain expansion. Domain expansion. Malevolent shrine. The ominous aura of this domain expansion forced Sukuna, who currently possessed the power of 2 fingers, to stop his movements and immediately retreat, looking toward the guy who initiated the domain. The feeling of this domain, it feels distorted somehow. Although the domain had been opened, there were no visible changes in the surroundings. However, Sukuna could clearly sense that he was inside a domain, and his body had obviously been hit by some kind of cursed technique. Sukuna looked at Fushiguro Shin, who was not far away and had taken the finger from inside the special grade cursed spirit. Hey, as expected, this is your true nature. It's much more pleasing to the eye than your original fawning expression. You really are an interesting fellow. Fushiguro Shin stared at the finger in his hand with a look of disgust and said, all right, now no one can disturb me. Megumi and the others have left, Itadori won't appear for a short time because of the price, and I've obtained the insurance to prevent you from easily dying and dragging Itadori down with you. As if he had heard the funniest joke, Sukuna laughed and said. For last words, those are quite hilarious. I'll kill you right now. Fushiguro Shin ignored Sukuna's words and instead looked at him as if looking at a dead man, declaring. I'll say this for now, the binding vow of this domain allows anyone to enter and exit freely. It cannot take effect directly on anyone or any cursed spirit, even if they are caught in it, it will be neutralized. However, it will only work on a few people, including you. Even someone as strong as Sukuna was shocked by the exaggerated binding vow Fushiguro Shin described. This was a binding vow so insane it was almost harsh, as if the Fushiguro Shin before him existed solely to deal with him. Despite being a possessor of the reverse heavenly restriction, he possessed terrifying cursed energy and even a domain with such a distorted binding vow. A smile gradually appeared on Sukuna's face as he shouted at Fushiguro Shin, try to make me fall for you, Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin appeared in front of Sukuna in an instant, so fast that even he was shocked. Fushiguro Shin grabbed Sukuna's hair with his left hand and made a punching motion with his right, saying with extreme disgust. Take a good feel of the sins you've committed. Fushiguro Shin's response was just a single punch. It was already terrifyingly bolstered by the reverse heavenly restriction, further reinforced with the immense cursed energy of the positive heavenly restriction, and finally, at the moment of impact, it layered the attraction reaction of blue. With just one punch, Sukuna's entire abdomen vanished, and even the malevolent shrine behind him instantly exploded. Fushiguro Shin looked at the upper half of Sukuna's body held in his hand with eyes like he was looking at trash, and said coldly. Hurry up and recover, you piece of trash. I don't intend to let Itadori die yet. A large amount of blood gushed from Sukuna's mouth. He hadn't even recovered from the shock of that blow. He couldn't understand what the effect of Fushiguro Shin's domain was, nor what means he had used for that strike just now. Sukuna raised his eyes and met Fushiguro Shin's downward gaze. In Sukuna's memory, there were almost no situations like this. I'm actually starting to fall for you, kid. Ryomen Sukuna's favorability increased to 10, gained 1000 experience. Fushiguro Shin was getting a bit annoyed. With a look of displeasure, he forcefully shoved that finger into Sukuna's mouth. Shut up. Keep your nauseating words to yourself. Who would accept your curse-like emotional garbage? He could feel Sukuna's power rising significantly, and his body was also rapidly reattaching and recovering. Fushiguro Shin could even feel that Sukuna had the momentum to engage in another grand battle with him. Fushiguro Shin threw the recovering Sukuna aside and said coldly. It's a pity for a piece of trash like you, killing anyone won't affect your will, but for now, sleep peacefully for me. Setting. Rather than the original effect, it is closer to causing the original result. As he spoke, a large amount of thick black liquid appeared out of thin air, filling almost the entire space and submerging Sukuna. Sukuna raised his palm, watching the liquid flowing in his hand as his consciousness sank bit by bit. This is successfully reversed Itadori's death fate, causing a huge deviation in Kenjaku's intelligence, gained 10,000 experience. With a loud bang, even the three people outside the building heard it clearly. Sitting in the driver's seat, Kiyotaka Eijichi said in shock, that commotion, was it the special grade cursed spirit? In his view, this commotion was no longer something that a simple special grade could explain, it wasn't even on the same level as some newly born special grade cursed spirits. Sitting in the back seat of the car, Kugasaki asked worriedly, what about Itadori and Shin? We should go in and help them, after all. Megumi Fushiguro, who had already learned about the previous events from Kugasaki, naturally knew that the current situation was a crisis far beyond Kugasaki's capabilities. While opening the car door to get out, Megumi Fushiguro instructed Kugasaki. No. There's no point in you and Mr. Eijichi staying. It would be better to quickly find a jujutsu sorcerer of first grade or higher to come back, though I think that might be difficult. After getting out of the car, Megumi Fushiguro recalled how he had been frozen with fear upon seeing the special grade cursed spirit just now, and began to doubt if he could really do it, confronting a special grade. Just then, Fushiguro Shin's voice rang out. Megumi, didn't I tell Kugasaki to leave with you first? Brother. Megumi Fushiguro looked ahead and saw Fushiguro Shin walking toward him, carrying Itadori by the scruff of his neck like he was carrying a cat. Such an exaggerated feat was only possible for Fushiguro Shin, who possessed the heavenly restriction and its terrifying strength. Hearing Fushiguro Shin's voice, Kugasaki and Kiyotaka Aijichi also rolled down the car windows and poked their heads out. Kugasaki asked, "Are you okay, Shin?" Kiyotaka Aijichi also asked, "What happened to that special grade?" While handing Itadori over to Megumi Fushiguro, Fushiguro Shin briefly explained. That special grade cursed spirit was dealt with by Sukuna inside Itadori. Moreover, the finger inside that cursed spirit was swallowed by Sukuna, causing Sukuna to lose control and Itadori's will to be suppressed. Megumi Fushiguro followed up, then Itadori, he should be fine. It took some effort to make him settle down. Who? Sukuna. Fushiguro Shin's seemingly nonchalant account sent massive waves through Kiyotaka Aijichi's heart. Kiyotaka Aijichi knew what Sukuna was, and that he had killed a special grade cursed spirit here, yet Fushiguro Shin had just brushed it off with a few casual words. This made Kiyotaka Aijichi feel it was necessary to notify Satoru Gojo. This became the message on Satoru Gojo's phone. On the Shinkansen returning from Hokkaido, Nanami was somewhat curious. He wondered exactly what was written on the phone Satoru Gojo was staring at. It was enough to make Satoru Gojo stop eating his sweets and halt the chatter that hadn't ceased throughout the journey. In private settings, 99% of what came out of Satoru Gojo's mouth was mindless, random nonsense. But while it wasn't right to just ignore the chatter, replying seriously to every single sentence was simply too exhausting. Thinking of this, Nanami let out a silent sigh. Such a person was his superior and an absolute powerhouse whose strength far surpassed his own. Perhaps only those who have had close contact and similar experiences could understand how tiring it is to deal with Satoru Gojo. Still, Nanami couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Even your expression has changed." Satoru Gojo rapidly tapped on his phone to reply while explaining to Nanami. Itadori lost control again after swallowing Sukuna's third finger. Nanami's brow furrowed. This clearly wasn't good news. Itadori. You mean Sukuna's vessel? What's the situation now? Satoru Gojo put away his phone and resumed munching on a donut as he answered. It's fine now. My lovely student Shin already settled everything. Although he is indeed being treated as Sukuna's vessel, the one I'm talking about is my student, Yuji Itadori. Hearing the name Fushiguro Shin, Nanami couldn't help but recall their two previous experiences on missions together. In Nanami's impression, Fushiguro Shin always liked to talk about his younger brother, Megumi Fushiguro, saying things like, "If possible, please look after my brother," to his seniors. During missions, he could always perfectly handle his portion of the work, achieving results both quickly and efficiently. Nanami's impression of him was that, despite being a junior who had only recently become a jujutsu sorcerer, he was an excellent choice for a mission partner. It was only upon reaching this point in his recollection that Nanami realized something was off. He asked in surprise. Shin. You mean Fushiguro Shin? He has a way to handle a special grade alone. Satoru Gojo didn't find Nanami's reaction strange. Or rather, he had long expected it, as he knew his student very well. Satoru Gojo licked the crumbs from his fingertips and said. Shin is very reliable, right? Don't be fooled by how he's usually as gentle as a house dog. He's not a dog, he's a wolf. Occasionally, he'll show his fangs. Besides this kind of situation, there's one other scenario where he becomes like that, but we basically won't encounter it anymore. Nanami didn't know the full extent of the relationship between Satoru Gojo and Fushiguro Shin, but he felt Gojo's description of his student sounded a bit odd. If Shin can handle a special grade alone, why is his evaluation only that of a grade 3 sorcerer? If his evaluation rose, he'd be required to go on more solo missions. Have you heard the phrase, the eldest brother is like a father? He's actually just a guy who dotes on his brother excessively. The low rating was his own request. You've been on missions with him, you've seen his, just right, strength, haven't you? Just right. Now that you mention it, it really did feel that way. But well, in situations where we're truly short-handed, Shin isn't stingy about stepping up. In short, he's a very reliable student. As Satoru Gojo spoke, he flashed a boastful smile at Nanami. Nanami smiled and shook his head. In the entire jujutsu world, only you could find so many special grade level students. In the medical room of Jujutsu High, Satoru Gojo looked at the unconscious Itadori and asked Kiyotaka Aijichi nearby. So according to Shin, Itadori swallowed another of Sukuna's fingers. Kiyotaka Aijichi explained to Satoru Gojo. Yes. According to him, after absorbing the third finger, Sukuna went out of control and took over Itadori's body. Shin then brought him under control. When he appeared before us, Shin was dragging the unconscious Itadori. Satoru Gojo had fought against a one-finger Sukuna, and he was also present when Itadori swallowed the second finger. Therefore, Satoru Gojo had more or less of an expectation regarding the strength of a three-finger Sukuna. Satoru Gojo smiled with sentiment. As expected of Shin, he really puts one at ease. Kiyotaka Aijichi followed up with a question, is Shin really that strong? Satoru Gojo's smile vanished, and he said flatly, if Shin weren't this strong, would it make sense to send 4 first-years to face an unknown special grade cursed spirit and demand they rescue 5 people whose status was unknown? Especially when I had already secured an indefinite stay of execution for Itadori. No matter how you look at it, they were deliberately targeting them. Satoru Gojo sighed and continued, those guys probably think that if several of their peers died together, it would annoy me a bit. From their perspective, it was a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Kiyotaka Aijichi felt the change in Satoru Gojo's mood and couldn't help but feel nervous. He tried to rationalize the matter. But when the matter was reported, it was still only at the level of a cursed womb. It wasn't clear that the transformation had already been completed. So, rather than finding the culprit, maybe I should just kill all the higher-ups. It was at this moment that Shoko Ieri walked into the room and commented on Satoru Gojo's dangerous statement. It's rare to see you being so emotional. I can see you're quite fond of him. Seeing Shoko arrive, Kiyotaka Aijichi immediately greeted her respectfully. Thank you for your hard work, Miss Ieri. Satoru Gojo immediately retorted. No matter the time, I am a good person who values his students. Because of that, I'm considering asking you to teach him how to use the reverse curse technique to prevent this kind of situation in the future. Aren't you the strongest? Why don't you teach him yourself? After thinking about Fushiguro Shin, Shoko immediately noticed something was wrong and added a follow-up question. Wait, isn't Shin under a heavenly restriction? Does he have enough cursed energy to use the reverse curse technique? Satoru Gojo quickly waved his hands. Too many questions at once. If I could teach it, I would have done it long ago. Shin is a bit special. If necessary, he can still bring out cursed energy. But the main reason I asked you here is to see why Itadori hasn't woken up yet. But Shoko was clearly not satisfied by Satoru Gojo's perfunctory answer. You're definitely hiding something regarding Shin, aren't you? While she continued to press him about Fushiguro Shin, Shoko's hands had already begun to examine the sleeping Itadori. Satoru Gojo just smiled and replied, I'm not hiding anything. Besides being my good student, he's just a good older brother who dotes on his younger brother. That's all. Inside Sukuna's innate domain, he sat atop a high pile of bones, legs crossed, resting his head on one hand. He looked at his other palm. Only now did he realize exactly what Fushiguro Shin had poured onto his body back then. If he wasn't mistaken, that strange liquid should be the special fluid of the bath. But Sukuna couldn't understand why Fushiguro Shin could summon such a thing. Furthermore, it was very strange why the bath, summoned by Fushiguro Shin, would have the opposite effect on him. Normally, the bath is a method to bring an object closer to the demonic, and it should have caused the soul of Itadori, whose body was occupied, to sink further. There was no reason for him, the king of curses, to sink because of the bath. Sukuna finally concluded that it was indeed an issue with Fushiguro Shin's strange domain. Including that punch Fushiguro Shin threw earlier, there was clearly something very wrong with it. Sukuna felt that if Fushiguro Shin could have landed such a blow before, there was no reason for him to use Black Flash for a strike intended to kill him when they first met. Sukuna muttered to himself, despite having a reverse heavenly restriction, he can explode with massive cursed energy and even use a domain. If that punch was also an effect of the domain, then it seems he hasn't even shown his curse technique yet. Fushiguro Shin, you truly are fascinating tilde. Sukuna continued to mutter, his mind filled with the way Fushiguro Shin had looked at him like trash, and the disdain and disgust he felt. His lips curled up unconsciously. Sukuna's favorability increased to 17, gained 500 express. Itadori's voice rang out within the domain. Hey, you! Where is this place? Sukuna glanced at Itadori below. Compared to Fushiguro Shin, Itadori was far too boring. So you're here too. It seems the effects of the bath have affected you more or less as well. Don't say things I can't understand. Let me out of here, now. A cunning expression appeared on Sukuna's face. Let's make a deal. If you agree to 2 conditions, I'll let you out. A certain memory of Fushiguro Shin. Toji looked at Megumi, who was crying in his mother's arms, then glanced at Shin, who was also watching Megumi from the side. This confirmed that, as expected, Shin was the only brat who wouldn't cry. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Shin grabbed Toji's finger with his small hand, looked at Toji, and said in a childish voice, Megumi is my younger brother, and I'm the big brother, so I'll protect Megumi. Toji's mouth hung open, and many thoughts flashed through his mind for a moment. Such as, in the world of jujutsu, protection might not be so simple. Why could such words come out of Shin's mouth? Was he really only a 1-year-old? Was being precocious really this exaggerated? Finally, Toji laughed self-deprecatingly. What was he doing, talking about this with a 1-year-old? Finally, Toji patted Shin's head and said, then I'll leave it to you. Shin also nodded his little head and replied seriously. Toji had also suspected whether Shin was possessed by some curse, but he found no problems. One could even say that since Shin possessed the same heavenly restriction as himself, his innate resistance to cursed energy meant that ordinary curses couldn't harm him at all. If it wasn't for Megumi's appearance, Toji might have even felt that raising a child wasn't that difficult. After all, the strength brought by the heavenly restriction allowed 1-year-old Shin to already take care of himself. Fushiguro Shin was a bit disgusted by the inexplicable increase in Sukuna's favorability. He just felt that trash had something wrong with him. Just thinking about Sukuna's self-inflicted favorability boost made him feel nauseous. Fushiguro Shin threw 2 bottles of water he bought from the vending machine to Megumi Fushiguro and Nobara Kugasaki respectively. Why are you guys being so negative? It's not your fault Itadori hasn't woken up. Fushiguro Shin felt that if he really looked into it, compared to the original reason of Itadori falling into a slumber because Sukuna ripped out his heart, although the specific reason for Itadori's slumber this time was unclear, it was likely related to him. Nobara Kugasaki toyed with the water bottle and said dejectedly, that's true, but I just feel like I was completely useless. Megumi Fushiguro also echoed, agreed. Fushiguro Shin comforted them, that was a special grade cursed spirit, after all. It was beyond what you could handle. Being able to leave unscathed is already a stroke of luck. Nobara Kugasaki stared at Fushiguro Shin and complained, Shin, you're so sly. You're clearly so strong, but you never show it normally. Fushiguro Shin shook his head with a smile and defended himself. But normally, I don't need to use it, do I? Megumi Fushiguro also helped his brother out, he's always been very low-key. If it weren't for him this time, I don't know how things would have turned out. I definitely couldn't have done as well as he did. Megumi Fushiguro spoke, and he couldn't help but remember his cowardice when facing the special grade cursed spirit. Fushiguro Shin patted Megumi Fushiguro's shoulder and sat down beside him. Actually, Megumi, you can completely handle enemies of that level, You just need a little more time to adapt and control your power. Megumi Fushiguro knew that Fushiguro Shin was referring to the eight-handled sword Divergent Sila Divine General Mahoraga. He also knew that if he summoned Mahoraga, he should be able to kill that special grade cursed spirit. It was just that Megumi Fushiguro wasn't confident in handling things after the cursed spirit was eliminated. Watching them, Nobara Kugasaki could feel the warmth of an older brother caring for his younger brother, but she felt like she shouldn't stay there. They were waiting for Satoru Gojo, who had gone to check on the situation with Itadori. Coincidentally, at this moment, the 3 second years also arrived. Maki Zenin was about to speak and lecture them on their negative attitudes, but Satoru Gojo appeared before Fushiguro Shin and the others first. Shin, let me see a bit of how you subdued the Sukuna who killed the special grade cursed spirit. Hearing Satoru Gojo's statement, Panda, Inamaki, and Maki were all stunned. Although they had heard that the 4 first years had just gone on a mission and someone had an issue, they didn't know the details. Maki Zenin had the biggest reaction. After all, she possessed a similar reverse heavenly restriction and had always considered Shin one of her own. It was truly hard to believe that Shin was actually so much stronger than her. What? Shin, you can handle a special grade. Is that true, Gojo-sensei? Menteiko. Fushiguro Shin was dissatisfied with Satoru Gojo making this information public in front of so many people and said decisively. I refuse. Satoru Gojo said with a smile. Refusal is invalid. This isn't a request, it's an order. Fushiguro Shin sighed. He knew that once Gojo Satoru said something like that, he was definitely serious. Seeing Shin's reaction, Gojo Satoru knew very well that Shin had given up resisting, so he opened his mouth to ask. So, do we need to change locations? Gojo Satoru was, of course, well aware of the fact that Fushiguro Shin had always kept a very low profile regarding his own strength. After brief consideration, Shin thought that information related to his domain could become a point of strategic advantage in an information gap. Spreading it out through this opportunity might not be a bad idea. Shin also noticed that everyone present had already focused their gaze on him. He slowly stood up and said calmly, no need to change locations. We'll do it right here. This answer surprised Gojo Satoru a bit. It wasn't that Shin was willing to show his power. But rather, was power sufficient to suppress Sukuna really going to be displayed in a place gathering so many people? With a burst of speed, Fushiguro Shin appeared beside Maki. Senior Maki, could I borrow your cursed tool? I didn't expect to fight someone like this today. Maki was now extremely curious about Shin's strength, so she naturally wouldn't refuse such a request. Moreover, the baseline favorability had already reached 20. Maki took off the pack holding the cursed tool and said to Fushiguro Shin. No problem. I remember you're more accustomed to using a sword, but I didn't happen to bring one today. A glaive should be fine for you, right? Fushiguro Shin took the long-hafted glaive from Maki's hand and casually twirled it, creating a flower-like pattern with the blade. No problem, you're a huge help. I'll treat you to lunch tomorrow. Gojo Satoru also watched Shin with great interest, asking with a smile. So, are you ready? Fushiguro Shin didn't answer Gojo's question. Instead, he instructed the others. Megumi, Kugasaki, and you, senior, please step back a bit further. Although it shouldn't affect you. Gojo Satoru, however, caught the key point in Shin's words. Won't affect others, what exactly did that mean? Consuming experience, initiating two-way heavenly restriction. The immense surge of cursed energy that Fushiguro Shin instantly released immediately startled Kugasaki, Inamaki, Panda, and Maki. Fushiguro Megumi wasn't too surprised, he was already used to his older brother Shin being a powerful existence. Before Maki could speak, the next moment, everyone including Gojo Satoru was plunged into an even deeper level of shock. Without making any movement, Fushiguro Shin spoke calmly. Domain expansion. Malevolent shrine. Shin knows a domain. Maki was almost speechless with shock. She now had a belly full of questions she wanted to press Shin on. Why could he, also burdened with a reverse heavenly restriction, erupt with this level of cursed energy? How exactly did he do it? And despite bearing a reverse heavenly restriction, he could actually use a domain. But at this moment, she could only wait until this duel was over. Gojo Satoru, however, clapped his hands and praised, truly worthy of Shin. Fushiguro Shin opened his mouth and said, anyone can freely enter or exit this domain. It does not directly activate on any person or cursed spirit. Even if someone is caught in it, the effect will be nullified. It only produces an effect on a specific individual. As for the effect, I don't want to tell you. After Fushiguro Shin disclosed the information about Malevolent Shrine, everyone fell into a brief silence. After all, for a domain, the conditions of Malevolent Shrine were far too restrictive. Although Gojo Satoru was somewhat shocked, he was the first to guess that this domain was probably prepared for him. What kind of twisted emotion must a jujutsu sorcerer possess to restrict their only domain to such an extent? This wasn't love or affection, but Fushiguro Shin's pure hatred, the hatred that had lingered around him ever since the day Toji died. Gojo Satoru couldn't help but feel a bit regretful. If not for this twisted fate, if Shin weren't living for hatred, he would undoubtedly become a jujutsu sorcerer not inferior to himself one day. Gojo Satoru asked directly, if you can use a domain, it should also mean you've awakened a cursed technique, right? Fushiguro Shin didn't answer with words. His figure instantly melted into the shadows. Seeing this situation, Fushiguro Megumi had the strongest reaction. The 10 Shadows technique. The next second, Fushiguro Shin instantly appeared from the shadow beneath Gojo Satoru, thrusting the glaive in his hand fiercely towards Gojo's back, aiming for his heart. Gojo Satoru reacted almost simultaneously, extending his right hand to block the strike head-on. However, the cursed energy imbued in the glaive directly pierced through his palm. What on earth is this? Gojo Satoru didn't mind an injury of this level. After all, he could easily heal it using reverse curse technique. What astonished him was that from the glaive, he sensed his own incredibly familiar, blue. Fushiguro Shin, looking at the wound he had caused, was only reflecting that this level was indeed still insufficient. With the guaranteed hit effect's blessing, it was indeed enough to injure Gojo Satoru, but it was still far from defeating or killing him. After all, the two-way heavenly restriction was activated by consuming experience. Moreover, he hadn't yet mastered reverse cursed technique, simple domain, and other necessary skills. His revenge wasn't aimed at Gojo Satoru alone, and he absolutely could not afford any mistakes. Thinking this, Fushiguro Shin retracted the glaive and halted the next technique he was preparing to release, saying calmly, anyway, the situation back then was roughly like this. Gojo Satoru used reverse curse technique and easily healed the injury on his hand. If it's at this level, it's certainly enough for the current Sukuna. However, if your opponent is me, you'll need to work harder at this level. Of course I know that. By the way, what's the name of the technique you just used? 10 Shadows Technique. Shadow Demon. 10 Shadows Technique. Shadow Demon can burrow from a shadow into the opponent's shadow, attacking from point-blank range. 10 Shadows Technique. Almost everyone simultaneously repeated this name. 10 Shadows Technique undoubtedly made one think of the 10 Shadows Technique, the hereditary cursed technique of the Zenin family, one of the big three families in the Jujutsu world, the very technique possessed by Fushiguro Megumi. In Gojo Satoru's view, a technique with shadow, as its core undoubtedly indicated a connection to the Zenin family. However, it being 10 Shadows Technique, and not 10 Shadows Technique, seemed to draw a line of separation. He couldn't help but think, heavenly restriction and 10 Shadows Technique. It seemed that between Toji's two children, Shin was the one more valuable to the Zenin family. Indeed, only he had sensed it correctly from the very beginning. Gojo Satoru's favorability has risen to 45. Gained 500 experience points. After pondering the connection between the two shadow-based techniques, the other Jujutsu High students couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Facing such a near-perfect ambush, they questioned whether, without prior knowledge, they could have escaped unscathed. Gojo Satoru asked, so, what are your other 9 types? Fushiguro Shin deactivated his two-way heavenly restriction state and answered decisively. I refuse to answer. I have no intention of revealing information to increase the power of my curse technique. In fact, within Fushiguro Shin's 10 Shadows technique, there were means to briefly seal Satoru Gojo's reverse curse technique, but there was no need to go that far in this fight. Gojo Satoru also noticed that Fushiguro Shin had returned to a state of mediocre cursed energy. Knowing that Shin's peak state didn't last long, he didn't press for an answer. Instead, the people from Jujutsu High surrounded Fushiguro Shin. Brother, since when were you able to use curse techniques? Shin, you rascal, you weren't lying about the heavenly restriction, were you? Shin, you actually managed to hurt Gojo-sensei. Tuna. Fushiguro Shin could only raise his hands in surrender, tilting his head as if he were at their mercy, and said, "Too many questions. I can't answer them all like this." Gojo Satoru looked at the crowded Fushiguro Shin and recalled what he had told Kiyotaka Eijichi shortly before Itadori woke up. He planned to foster a group of strong and intelligent comrades, and he had specifically mentioned the third-year Hikari and the second-year Okatsu. Gojo Satoru felt it was a pity, he should have included the first-year Shin back then as well. Since he had already confirmed things with Fushiguro Shin, his next priority would be focusing on educating Itadori. Finally finished with everyone's questions, Fushiguro Shin turned to Maki and the others. So, Senior Maki, is there a reason you all came here? Maki crossed her arms. Although Fushiguro Shin explained that even he didn't know why someone with a reverse heavenly restriction could possess cursed energy, cursed techniques, and a domain, Maki still felt he wasn't telling the whole truth. Originally, I wanted you to participate in the Kyoto Sister School Goodwill event. Since that third-year idiot is currently suspended, we're short-handed. But now that you've shown this kind of strength, Shin, I won't let you refuse. Being the newest student, Kugasaki took the initiative to ask. So, what is this exchange meeting for? Panda explained, it's a 2-day event with the other Jujutsu High in Kyoto. The first day is a group battle, and the second day is individual battles. Salmon. Kugasaki was quite surprised that such a competition existed between Jujutsu sorcerers. A competition between Jujutsu sorcerers. That's right. It's a Jujutsu war where anything goes, except for killing your opponent. Maki said, a meaningful smile playing on her lips. Panda added from the side, those are the rules, but it usually doesn't go that far. Of course, to make sure you don't get killed, I'll train you well. Maki pointed at Fushiguro Shin and said, but you're different. I want you to spar with me. Alright, Senior Maki. Maki Zenon's favorability has risen to 23. Gained 300 experience. Fushiguro Shin naturally had no reason to refuse an opportunity to increase favorability, especially now that he understood the gap between himself and Gojo Satoru. Furthermore, having Megumi Fushiguro undergo different styles of sparring would help improve his overall strength. At a certain street corner, Jago questioned Suguru Geto, so, was it really necessary to use a precious finger just to confirm Sukuna's strength? As Jago's emotions fluctuated, even the miniature volcano on his head began to erupt. Suguru Geto recalled the information that had even shocked him slightly. Fushiguro Shin, a first year at Jujutsu High, had suppressed a 3-fingered Sukuna without taking a single scratch. With his knowledge, he knew roughly how strong Sukuna was at this stage. There were still quite a few people in the Jujutsu world who could subdue him. But what surprised him most was that the one who suppressed Sukuna was the eldest son who inherited Zenin Toji's heavenly restriction. Fushiguro Shin's appearance and the way it disrupted his original plans made him feel somewhat uneasy. Last time, it was Toji who broke the cycle of fate. What would his child change this time? But he wouldn't reveal any of this to Jago and the others. Sending a half-wit wouldn't have tested Sukuna's strength. Besides, this operation gave me quite a few unexpected gains. It was a worthwhile trade. Humph, I hope you're not just making excuses. Fushiguro Shin spent some time delivering the nameplates he had taken from the juvenile detention center to the parents. Fushiguro Shin could empathize with the grief of losing a loved one, but if it hadn't been for the fact that this matter was originally related to Megumi Fushiguro, he wouldn't have gone this far out of sympathy. Call it rationality or cold-bloodedness, Fushiguro Shin didn't feel like he could afford to play the part of a do-gooder when his own revenge wasn't even complete. Building good relationships with the people at Jujutsu High was only to increase his strength, that was the limit of his effort. He had no interest in worrying about the lives of others. Looking at the weeping mother, Fushiguro Shin didn't choose to apologize as Megumi Fushiguro would have. Since the dead couldn't be saved, all he could do was inform them. Mostly, it served as a warning to himself. He must never become someone like this, someone who could do nothing but grieve when their family was gone. Informed the family of the death in place of Megumi Fushiguro. Gained 200 experience. Upon leaving, Fushiguro Shin stopped by a fast food restaurant to pick up lunch for everyone, fulfilling his promise to Maki from the day before. It wasn't anything lavish, just Western fast food like burgers and fries, as Fushiguro Shin remembered that these were the foods Maki liked. When Fushiguro Shin returned to Jujutsu High with the food and didn't see Megumi Fushiguro or Kugasaki with Maki and the others, he felt a faint sense of foreboding. Maki complained to the late Fushiguro Shin, "You're so slow. Where did you go? You're not trying to avoid sparring with me, are you?" Fushiguro Shin handed the food to Panda and explained. "Not at all. I just went to handle the aftermath of the last incident and then spent some time picking up the food. Where are Megumi and Kugasaki?" Maki also leaned in, rummaging through the food in the bag and muttering. "No coke. Good thing I sent Megumi and Kugasaki to run errands." Fushiguro Shin's expression had already turned cold. He asked Panda. "The Kyoto principal is coming today, right?" Panda swallowed a whole burger and muttered, "Now that you mention it, Shin, it seems it is today." Just then, a loud noise echoed from a distant building. As they looked over, they were suddenly startled by the terrifying cursed energy beside them. Panda took a combat stance, Maki raised her weapon defensively, and even Inamaki pulled down his collar. Consuming experience to activate two-way heavenly restriction. Shin. Maki stared in the direction Fushiguro Shin had left, murmuring to herself. Is that the kind of expression that should appear on Shin's face? Maki recalled the terrifying profile of Fushiguro Shin she had just seen. The intense killing intent within that cursed energy was the reason their bodies had reacted involuntarily. Okaka. A bead of sweat silently fell from Inamaki's face. Panda was also greatly astonished. The usually gentle Fushiguro Shin was now revealing such a terrifying demeanor. We should hurry and follow him. I have a feeling things are about to get out of hand. Aoi Todo directly threw Fushiguro Megumi onto the high platform, breaking the bucket binding bow Fushiguro Megumi had set up, and spoke with disdain. As expected, it's boring. I can't feel any fighting spirit from you at all. Before he could finish his sentence, Fushiguro Shin's fist had already arrived. With a loud bang, Aoi Todo was sent flying several meters, crashing through several massive wooden pillars before coming to a stop. Even though Aoi Todo had used cursed energy to defend himself, he still coughed up a large amount of blood mixed with 5 broken teeth. Aoi Todo was inwardly shocked. This simple punch was far too terrifying. If he hadn't sensed it, he might have been knocked unconscious by now. Sensing the chilling cursed energy emanating from Fushiguro Shin, Aoi Todo immediately thought of Yuta Okatsu. But the undisguised killing intent instantly made him tense his nerves. Fushiguro Shin covered his mouth, trying his best to calm himself down. If we had met under different circumstances, I might have tried to curry favor by saying I like women with big heads and big butts. Hearing Fushiguro Shin's words, Aoi Todo couldn't understand what he meant for a moment. Fushiguro Shin also gave up on calming down. He smashed the wooden beam beside him with a punch and spoke through gritted teeth. Left hand or right hand? Aoi Todo instinctively asked back, what? I'm asking you, this piece of trash, which hand dared to touch my precious little brother? Only then did Aoi Todo understand why this person he had never met before was radiating such intense killing intent towards him. Seeing Aoi Todo remain silent, Fushiguro Shin reigned in his madness and spoke with extreme coldness. Left hand or right hand, it doesn't matter anymore. Never mind, just cut them both off. 10 Shadows Technique. Cat's Cradle. 10 Shadows Technique. Cat's Cradle consumes cursed energy to grant cutting effects to shadows within a space, similar to the cleave used by Sukuna. The position where Aoi Todo was standing, due to the shadow cast by the sunlight hitting the eaves, became the perfect medium for Fushiguro Shin's cat's cradle. The moment Aoi Todo saw the shadow change, he already sensed the danger. As Aoi Todo quickly dodged, Fushiguro Shin had already appeared behind him using Shadow Demon. Pathetic. Do you think you can run away, you trash? Clench your teeth and don't you dare die. Fushiguro Shin's right foot, raised high, came crashing down on Aoi Todo's back. Black Flash activated, directly shattering Aoi Todo's shoulder blade. Due to the tremendous impact, Aoi Todo was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing through layer after layer of wooden structures before plummeting underground. Just like what he had done to Fushiguro Megumi moments before, except one was upward and the other was downward. With a loud bang, even the building shook slightly. Sunlight shone down through the huge opening above, creating countless shadows that covered Aoi Todo's body. Aoi Todo coughed up another mouthful of blood. The intense pain from his shoulder made him realize his condition was already very poor. Standing high above, Fushiguro Shin spoke coldly to Aoi Todo, his back to the sunlight. Let me ask you this, just for the record. You were the one who laid hands on Megumi first, right? Gazing up at Fushiguro Shin, Aoi Todo simply uttered one word. Yeah. Fushiguro Shin raised his left hand. The shadow cast by the sunlight sliced Aoi Todo's body into several sections, particularly at both wrists. Aoi Todo was also very clear that Fushiguro Shin was about to use that exaggerated shadow technique again. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he commanded his body, preparing to use his own technique, Boogie Woogie, to escape. Although there were many things he couldn't figure out, why this Jujutsu High had such a strong guy, and why the fight had escalated to this degree of seriousness. Aoi Todo now knew one thing for certain, this guy Fushiguro Shin was dead serious. But unfortunately, Fushiguro Shin had already seen through Aoi Todo's plan. Fushiguro Shin did intend to use Cat's Cradle again, but not just Cat's Cradle. If the attack wouldn't hit, using a technique would just be a waste of cursed energy. 10 Shadows Technique. Kujiboku, Boogie Woogie. 10 Shadows Technique. Cat's Cradle. 10 Shadows Technique. Kujiboku. By declaring the next technique the opponent will use within 3 seconds, if the guess is correct, the opponent's technique will be disrupted by their own shadow. The form of disruption varies, such as preventing the technique's formation or, in the case of reverse cursed technique, directly causing damage. Conversely, if the declaration fails, Fushiguro Shin will enter a technique burnout state. When Aoi Todo heard the words, Boogie Woogie, from Fushiguro Shin's mouth, a strong sense of foreboding washed over him. But he had no choice now. Trapped underground and almost enveloped by shadows, if he didn't use Boogie Woogie to escape upwards, he dreaded to imagine what awaited him if he charged into the surrounding darkness completely covered in shadows. Clenching his teeth against the excruciating pain in one shoulder, Aoi Todo moved his hands to activate Boogie Woogie. Just as his palms were about to clap together to complete the technique, two shadow-formed hands appeared, each gripping one of Aoi Todo's hands, fingers interlocked. And since these two shadow hands possessed substance, Aoi Todo's attempted clap was actually just the backs of these two shadow hands colliding. A feeling of despair enveloped Aoi Todo's mind. I'm done for. The admission ticket for Takata-chan's handshake event fluttered from Aoi Todo's pocket into the shadows, instantly torn into countless shreds. Don't move. Inamaki's voice rang out at that moment. Even though the cursed speech took effect, it couldn't stop Fushiguro Shin anymore, because Cat's Cradle had been completed and concluded the moment it was released. What in the world? The scene before Maki was far too shocking. One must remember, Aoi Todo was a third-year student at Kyoto Jujutsu High, a first-grade jujutsu sorcerer, and a disciple of Yuki Tsukumo, one of the contemporary special-grade sorcerers. Yet before the enraged Fushiguro Shin, he was indeed so utterly helpless, unable to even manage one of the two things, counter-attacking or escaping. In the distant reception room, both Gojo Satoru and Yoshinobu Gakuganji sensed the terrifying outburst of cursed energy. Yoshinobu Gakuganji's face turned somewhat grim as he asked Gojo Satoru, "What is the meaning of this massive surge of cursed energy?" Because of the cursed energy resistance provided by the heavenly restriction, Inumaki's cursed speech did not affect Fushiguro Shin for too long. Panda stepped forward to examine Todo Aoi, who was lying in a pool of blood, covered in fine lacerations. The two most severe wounds were on both wrists, with a super large amount of bleeding. One could say, as expected of Aoi Todo, even though Fushiguro Shin had intentionally held back, not attacking with the intent to kill him, aside from severing his hands, the injuries on his body were considerably lighter than Fushiguro Shin had anticipated. Panda reached out to check Aoi Todo's breathing and excitedly said, "He seems to still be alive." Fushiguro Shin used Shadow Demon to move the severed hands in front of him, then completely severed them using flipping rope. Afterward, Fushiguro Shin scattered the fragments, looking down at Aoi Todo and saying, "I know you're not dead. Listen to me and tell those people at your Kyoto Jujutsu High, think carefully before you try to touch Fushiguro Megumi, whether you can withstand my wrath." Deprived Todo Aoi of the ability to use Boogie Woogie, greatly negatively altering his original fate, earning a reward of 20,000 experience points. Fushiguro Shin had always known that it wasn't only by killing villains like Sukuna that he could receive the system's reversal reward. It's just that he wasn't a bloodthirsty person. If it were just him, it wouldn't matter. But going too far could easily lead to others taking their anger out on his family. Fushiguro Megumi had some self-preservation ability, but Sumiki was a completely ordinary person. Aoi Todo barely managed to lift his eyelids, revealing a small slit, staring at the tyrant who stood high above, issuing threatening remarks. Then he struggled to look at where his hands should have been. He found it hard to accept that he was completely unable to use his cursed technique because of this. Maki, Panda, and Inumaki looked at Fushiguro Shin. They all heard that Fushiguro Shin's tone was serious. Compared to previously understanding Fushiguro Shin's strength, now they truly felt fear towards him. They knew that the usually gentle Fushiguro Shin cherished his younger brother greatly, always asking others to take good care of Fushiguro Megumi. It was only now that they realized the extent of his affection for Fushiguro Megumi. They also suddenly understood why Fushiguro Shin allowed himself to be rated as a grade 3 sorcerer without complaint and deliberately concealed his strength. Was it all to better protect Fushiguro Megumi? It was at this moment that Nu flew down, clutching Fushiguro Megumi, whose mind went blank at the sight of the mess below. "Brother, what is all this?" Fushiguro Shin controlled his expression to return to calm, explaining in his usual tone, "Nothing, I just taught a lesson to the guy who bullied you a little." Taught a lesson. Fushiguro Megumi's gaze fell on Aoi Todo, the man who had just beaten him up, now lying in a pool of blood, his hands severed, his life unknown. Fushiguro Megumi was quite conflicted for a moment. He certainly knew that his brother's actions were for him, but to this extent. Fushiguro Megumi naturally knew that Fushiguro Shin's actions were wrong, and his brother must have known it too. But Fushiguro Megumi had no right to blame Fushiguro Shin, because this matter, from the very beginning, was due to his own weakness. "Brother, I'm actually fine, there's no need to go to this extent. You're so badly hurt, and you say you're fine." Fushiguro Shin continued apologetically, "It's my fault. If I could have learned reverse cursed technique earlier, you wouldn't have had to endure until Ms. Shoko treated you." Panda below couldn't stand it anymore and whispered to Maki and Inumaki beside him. "No way, in order to be able to treat Megumi at any time, Shin wants to specifically learn reverse curse technique. Won't Megumi really be spoiled like this?" Having witnessed too much in a short time, from domains to jujutsu, and now overwhelmingly defeating a grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer, Panda did not doubt the possibility of Fushiguro Shin learning reverse curse technique. Tuna. Inumaki also made an affirmative sound. Maki, however, looked at Fushiguro Megumi and Fushiguro Shin and felt a little envious. It was at this moment that the second group of people arrived, Gojo Satoru and Yoshinobu Gakuganji. After Yoshinobu Gakuganji confirmed Aoi Todo's survival, he glared at Gojo Satoru and demanded, "Given this situation, don't you need to give me an explanation?" Fushiguro Shin stepped forward directly and said to Yoshinobu Gakuganji, "I did it. You." Yoshinobu Gakuganji looked at this somewhat unfamiliar face, showing a puzzled expression. Mainly because he was quite aware of Aoi Todo's strength as a grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer, and he thought that only that kid named Okatsu Yuta from last year would have the ability to injure him like this. He didn't expect an unfamiliar face to come forward and take responsibility. Yoshinobu Gakuganji had not heard that Tokyo Jujutsu High had recruited any special grade jujutsu sorcerers besides Itadori. Gojo Satoru, meanwhile, turned and cast an inquiring gaze at Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin stared at Gojo Satoru and said word by word, "Gojo-sensei, you should be very clear that I absolutely will not allow anyone to harm my family, not even you. He attacked Megumi first. I just taught him a lesson. I didn't expect him to be just a piece of trash." Gojo Satoru was not surprised by Fushiguro Shin's answer, because he knew this matter better than anyone. Yoshinobu Gakuganji's eyes were cold as he spoke. "You've now severely injured a grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer, severed his hands rendering him unable to use his cursed technique, and you intend to dismiss it as just a lesson." Fushiguro Shin calmly replied, "He touched Megumi, not killing him was already my mercy. Can't he recover from that level of injury using reverse curse technique himself? Ignorant brat, do you think reverse curse technique is a skill just anyone can learn?" Fushiguro Shin understood that Yoshinobu Gakuganji probably wasn't going to let him off easily. After a brief thought, he asked Gojo Satoru. "So, reverse cursed technique is about adding cursed energy to cursed energy, using a negative times a negative to get a positive, to obtain positive healing ability, right?" Gojo Satoru was slightly stunned, not realizing what Fushiguro Shin was trying to do. "Exactly, the principle is the same as I once told you." Fushiguro Shin nodded slightly, looking down at Yoshinobu Gakuganji and saying, "So as long as I prove that reverse curse technique can be learned very easily, and that so-called grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer is just a piece of trash, then you'll have nothing more to say, right?" "Ridiculous, what kind of nonsense are you spouting now?" Although Yoshinobu Gakuganji didn't know how this unfamiliar first year defeated Aoi Todo, it was most likely someone like Okatsu Yuta, who possessed innate talent. Reverse cursed technique was not the simple thing Fushiguro Shin claimed it to be. Fushiguro Shin's expression was calm. He raised his right hand and released flipping rope, directly severing his entire left arm. Blood immediately gushed out. Gojo Satoru's eyes widened, and even Yoshinobu Gakuganji's mouth hung open. "Brother, what are you doing?" Gojo Satoru's eyes widened at Fushiguro Shin's actions. He hadn't expected Fushiguro Shin to actually go through with it. It should be noted that even Gojo Satoru had only mastered the reverse curse technique during his battle with Toji, when he was in a near-death emergency. Yoshinobu Gakuganji also keenly captured Gojo Satoru's reaction in that instant, guessing that this first-year brat shouldn't have mastered the reverse curse technique himself. In Yoshinobu Gakuganji's view, Fushiguro Shin was merely someone blessed by heaven who, after gaining a bit of talent, no longer knew his own place. He was currently seeking death. Or rather, as expected of a student taught by Gojo Satoru, the arrogance and conceit were inherited from the same lineage. Yoshinobu Gakuganji couldn't help but let out a cold sneer. But the actual situation was quite the opposite. The reason Fushiguro Shin dared to do this was because his way of learning was different from others. What was difficult for others to learn was a simplified process for Fushiguro Shin. He only needed to grope for the usage method of a skill while moving in the right general direction to acquire that skill. As he circulated his cursed energy according to the requirements of the reverse curse technique, the system's notification rang in his ears. Acquired reverse curse technique, grade 4 and 0/100. The level of a skill is divided similarly to ability levels. The difference is that different levels represent the degree of proficiency with the skill. Grade 4 represents mastery enough to barely use it, and going up from there indicates higher degrees of mastery. For the reverse curse technique, one must reach at least first grade level for it to be effective on others. After acquiring the reverse curse technique, Fushiguro Shin directly consumed experience to upgrade it to the first grade level. Reverse curse technique first grade, 0.50 thousandths. Seeing Fushiguro Shin completely ignore the wound and let the blood flow continuously. Megumi Fushiguro and Gojo Satoru wanted to step forward, but they were both stopped by Fushiguro Shin. As the reverse curse technique circulated, the wound on Fushiguro Shin's arm was seen regrowing at an astonishing speed. In just a few breaths, it was as good as new. Maki's eyes went wide, and she muttered in disbelief. Is it really the reverse curse technique? Even Gojo Satoru was frightened by Fushiguro Shin's exaggerated learning ability. He hadn't even asked Shoko to guide him yet, and he had mastered the reverse curse technique just like that through verbal description, and could even restore an entire arm on his first use. Gojo Satoru's favorability has risen to 50, obtained 500 experience. Fushiguro Shin raised that arm restored by the reverse curse technique and said to Yoshinobu Gakuganji. Is this enough? If even I, a grade 3 sorcerer, can do this, can't he, a first grade, do the same? Yoshinobu Gakuganji stared fixedly at Fushiguro Shin. He was unwilling to believe that this brat had just learned the reverse curse technique. Furthermore, how could someone who just learned the reverse curse technique achieve such a degree? Everything must be Fushiguro Shin acting in league with Gojo Satoru to make him make a wrong judgment, hoping to use this to escape. Yoshinobu Gakuganji spoke. Do you think that by intentionally hiding your ability to use the reverse curse technique? Gojo Satoru interrupted Yoshinobu Gakuganji's words. Sorry, Shin really didn't know how to use the reverse curse technique before. You are his teacher, do you think I will believe your words? Gojo Satoru wore a provocative smile and asked, I haven't fallen so low as to need to lie about such a thing. Is my student so dazzling that you find it unacceptable? Seeing that smile, Yoshinobu Gakuganji roared in uncontrollable rage. Gojo Satoru. Don't yell so loudly. Some things can't be gained through envy, don't kick the bucket out of jealousy. After witnessing Fushiguro Shin's reverse curse technique, Gojo Satoru had decided to see this matter through to the end. The value of one Fushiguro Shin was truly difficult for even two Aoi to-dos to compare to. And at this time, Fushiguro Shin spoke. I will absolutely not apologize for this matter. It's a fact that he made the first move on Megumi, and it's also a fact that I taught him a lesson. If you want revenge, I can accompany you at any time, even if you are the Kyoto principal. Under the sun's rays, the shadow of Fushiguro Shin's raised palm happened to grip Yoshinobu Gakuganji's neck. Yoshinobu Gakuganji met Fushiguro Shin's cold gaze, which was like that of a tyrant. He also felt the cursed energy emanating from his body, which was wrapped in killing intent. For some reason, Yoshinobu Gakuganji felt that even if he made a move, he didn't seem certain of a steady win against this brat. Continuing to entangle would yield no results. Aoi Todo also needed someone to treat him, and they were currently on Tokyo Jujutsu High's turf. Yoshinobu Gakuganji could only temporarily avoid his sharp edge. Brat, what is your name? Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin. Yoshinobu Gakuganji remembered the matter of this surname. It was the two offspring left behind by the Zenin family's heavenly tyrant, and it seemed they had also inherited the Zenin family's Ten Shadows technique. But did the Ten Shadows technique have a way to leave Aoi Todo with no power to fight back? Yoshinobu Gakuganji pointed at Aoi Todo and said to Gojo Satoru, call your people to come and treat him already. Hearing Yoshinobu Gakuganji's words, Gojo Satoru naturally knew he had temporarily backed down this time, so he told Maki to go call Shoko over. Fushiguro Shin, however, said with dissatisfaction, Megumi was clearly injured first, shouldn't he be treated first? Although Gojo Satoru knew Fushiguro Shin's temperament, he still said crossly, if he dies, the matter becomes something else entirely. Megumi's injury can be given emergency treatment first. Fushiguro Shin understood, he couldn't count on Shoko's side for the time being. He remembered that after raising the reverse curse technique to first grade, he should be able to use it on others. Megumi, come here. Oh. If it's to be used on someone else, it should be like this, right? Fushiguro Shin muttered as he used the reverse curse technique on Megumi Fushiguro. When Gojo Satoru heard Fushiguro Shin's muttering, he felt the situation wasn't quite right. When Gojo Satoru turned his head and saw Fushiguro Shin using the reverse curse technique to treat Megumi Fushiguro, he was also truly shocked. Not only could he use the reverse curse technique, but he could even apply the effects of a just learned reverse curse technique to others. Gojo Satoru was truly speechless now. One must know that looking at the entire Jujutsu world, only a handful of people could do such a thing, and even Gojo Satoru himself couldn't do it. When Yaga returned and learned of this situation, he also felt a headache. After all, as someone in the know, he wasn't surprised by Fushiguro Shin's performance, but he just felt it was done a bit extremely. But learning that Fushiguro Shin had actually comprehended the reverse curse technique, and moreover, a reverse curse technique that could treat others just like Shoko's, was also quite unexpected. To a certain extent, it diluted Yaga's negative views on the matter. But he truly felt an endless headache over how to handle Fushiguro Shin, especially since while he was worrying, Gojo Satoru was still constantly showing off his education of Shin on the side. Gojo Satoru sat on the sofa, crossing his arms over his chest and smiling. Ha ha ha, as expected of me. To think I taught Shin how to use domain expansion and the reverse curse technique in such a short time. Yaga couldn't help but expose him, saying irritably, "Are you sure you were the one who taught him? You can't even use the reverse curse technique on others yourself, can you?" But such words didn't affect Gojo Satoru in the slightest. That's not important. What matters is that without my guidance, he wouldn't have had the chance to learn the reverse curse technique, let alone master the skill of using it on others. Yaga rubbed his temples. If he weren't outmatched in a fight, he would have definitely shut Gojo Satoru up. If you can really teach well, then teach him not to be so extreme. Luckily, no lives were lost. You should say it's a good thing I'm the one teaching him. If it were anyone else, do you think they'd actually be able to stop Shin when he goes berserk? Gojo Satoru said indifferently. Yaga indeed still lacked a clear understanding of Fushiguro Shin's strength, only knowing that he could use a domain and had easily left Aoi Todo severely injured. Is Shin really that strong? Yaga was still somewhat uncertain, hearing such high praise from Gojo Satoru's mouth. He's very strong. Even without public information on his domain, its effects are already incredibly powerful. Though I don't understand the principle yet, I felt blue in Shin's attacks after his domain was opened. Yaga was completely shocked and pressed Gojo Satoru further. When did you teach him, blue? Gojo Satoru shook his head and replied, never. Then how is it possible for Shin to use it? Are you sure you didn't misfeel it? No one is more familiar with blue than I am. I believe it must be an effect brought about by his domain. Realizing Fushiguro Shin's strength, Yaga only felt his headache worsening. Alright, enough of that. Let's talk about serious business. Aoi Todo has to stay here for a while to recover, so I think it's best not to let Shin stay at Jujutsu High for now. Gojo Satoru understood what Yaga meant and said with a smile. What, do you think Shin would start a fight again if he saw him? He wouldn't. Once he calms down, he's not the type to do something like that. Yaga massaged his forehead and said, I know that, of course. It's just a precaution. Besides, the remaining time is just for the students to prepare for the Goodwill event. Since Shin has already beaten the opposing grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer like this, there's no need for him to prepare. Give him something to do, basically, keep him from thinking about this matter anymore. I understand. I'll arrange something for him. With Shin's strength, he can indeed help me keep an eye on Sukuna inside Itadori. Fushiguro Shin looked at Gojo Satoru in front of him and asked, so you're planning to have me accompany Itadori and Nanami on a mission? Gojo Satoru nodded and said, that's right. Although your strength has been revealed, it will take some time before your evaluation is officially modified. This arrangement is reasonable. Besides, you can also give Itadori some guidance on getting stronger. In addition to a senior's teaching, words from a peer are also crucial. Originally, Fushiguro Shin wanted to use this time to build up some favorability. If he was going to grind favorability, he naturally had to choose the side with more people. Staying at Jujutsu High to practice with everyone was undoubtedly the best choice. As for Nanami and Itadori's side, setting aside a composed character like Nanami, it would be very difficult to make any significant gains through a single mission. For Itadori, it was basically the same reason. Furthermore, with Sukuna's strangely rising favorability, Fushiguro Shin felt that his involvement might cause some development outside of Sukuna's script. Although he wasn't sure what state Sukuna was currently in after being subjected to the bath. Fushiguro Shin began to reject the arrangement, asking tentatively, "Aren't we supposed to participate in the goodwill event with Kyoto Jujutsu High later? Don't I need to undergo special training like Megumi and the others?" Gojo Satoru countered decisively, "You need special training. For what? To train you to take them all down single-handedly." But Fushiguro Shin still didn't give up and continued to ask, "But for a normal mission, isn't Nanami already accompanying Itadori? There's no need to add me, right?" Gojo Satoru still answered casually, "Of course there is. I probably haven't told you, but not long ago, I was attacked by 2 unregistered special grade cursed spirits. Combined with the previous special grade cursed spirit incident, there are quite a few enemies moving in the shadows. It's not that I don't trust Nanami, but I'd be very troubled if anything happened to Itadori." Fushiguro Shin sighed. Since Gojo Satoru had put it that way, he no longer had the right to refuse. "Fine, I understand. But while I'm away, if the Kyoto side takes their anger out on Megumi, I understand. Although that shouldn't happen, if it does, I'll handle it." Fushiguro Shin thought for a moment and called out, "Gojo sensei." Gojo Satoru was stunned for a moment before laughing. "I almost thought I misheard. I didn't expect to hear you call me sensei." Fushiguro Shin didn't waste words and stated his purpose directly. "Teach me new shadow style. Simple domain." Gojo Satoru's eyes narrowed slightly behind his black blindfold as he looked at Fushiguro Shin and asked, "You have your own domain. Why do you want to learn the new shadow style?" Fushiguro Shin's gaze toward Gojo Satoru grew sharper as he said seriously, "Just that level isn't enough to kill you, is it? Could it be that Gojo sensei, just like with the reverse cursed technique, doesn't know the new shadow style, simple domain either? Or are you worried that I'll kill you after learning more techniques?" It was an obvious provocation, but sometimes the simplest method is the most direct and effective. Gojo Satoru leaned down, his face close to Fushiguro Shin's, and said, "It seems you really want to kill me, your teacher." At this moment, Fushiguro Shin didn't hide his killing intent at all and said gloomily, "I dream of killing you every night." Gojo Satoru laughed, quite satisfied with Fushiguro Shin's honesty. "I am the strongest, after all. Of course I know the new shadow style, simple domain, and I can teach you. But if you want to kill me, you'll have to keep working hard just to keep up with me first. That day will come. And I don't think it'll be too far off. Then I shall look forward to it." That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories. Hello everyone, this is Fanfic Audiobook. Here you find original fan-made audio stories.
Curse Return. The Fukuro family's bloody revenge. Part 2. Nanami looked at Fushiguro Shin and said, "It's been a long time, Shin." "Long time no see, Nanami-senpai." Itadori looked at the two greeting each other and asked curiously, "Did you two already know each other?" Fushiguro Shin explained, "I enrolled earlier than you, and I've been on some missions with Nanami-senpai before." Nanami pushed up his glasses and spoke, "However, hearing about your recent situation from Gojo really surprised me. I didn't expect you to have grown into such a reliable jujutsu sorcerer." Kento Nanami's favorability increased to 20, gained 500 experience points. Understanding the cause and effect of those events, Nanami didn't intend to discuss them. At least in his eyes, as a comrade, Fushiguro Shin was undoubtedly qualified and reliable, he hadn't made him work any overtime since the beginning. Nanami was just about to teach Itadori and said to him, "Can you see them? The residues of cursed energy." Fushiguro Shin couldn't help but interrupt, Nanami-senpai, let's go to the rooftop first. I've already dealt with the two cursed spirits, but they seem a bit special. I'd like you to confirm them. Nanami didn't react for a moment, stunned for a few seconds. When did you do that? Fushiguro Shin explained patiently, probably while I was exchanging pleasantries with you. I could sense the cursed energy reaction from the rooftop, so I just used my cursed technique to deal with them. Since the special grade finger cursed energy incident, Itadori hadn't seen Fushiguro Shin in action, nor the battle with Sukuna. So Itadori turned to look at the floor plan of the building, the sign detailing the contents of each floor, and then asked Fushiguro Shin in shock. There are 5 whole floors, Shin, and you've already dealt with the cursed spirits. In reality, Nanami's level of shock was no less than Itadori's. He hadn't expected Fushiguro Shin's cursed technique to be capable of such a thing, but being mature, he hid his shock well. Fushiguro Shin also briefly demonstrated his cursed technique to Nanami, reaching his hand into the shadow and then appearing from the shadow under Itadori's feet, tugging at his pant leg. As long as I can lock onto the opponent's position, I can connect through shadows. After all, generally speaking, shadows are everywhere unless there's a special lighting situation where there are no shadows. Nanami rubbed his chin in agreement, that is true. But more than the cursed technique, your perception is truly exaggerated. Killed 2 cursed spirits in advance, partially rewriting the plot, gained 500 experience. Let's save the small talk for after we're done, Fushiguro Shin said, gesturing for the two to quickly go upstairs to check the situation. Looking at Fushiguro Shin's back, Nanami found it hard to connect him with the arrogant and wild image Satoru Gojo had described. However, Nanami wasn't the only one with a great interest in Fushiguro Shin. Sukuna inside Itadori was even more annoyed at not being able to see Fushiguro Shin's curse technique. Sukuna inside Itadori sat with his legs crossed, resting his chin on one hand, and muttered to himself. Shin, show me a little more. Sukuna's favorability rose to 17, gained 200 experience. Hearing the system prompt, Fushiguro Shin couldn't help but frown. Fushiguro Shin thought to himself that as expected, the bath couldn't restrict Sukuna for too long. But Sukuna's inexplicable increase in favorability still disgusted him, as if he were being watched by a creepy guy. Before long, the three arrived at the rooftop. Nanami was still shocked by the 2 piles of cursed spirits cut into pieces before him. In fact, Fushiguro Shin hadn't just used Shadow Demon, he had used a combo of Shadow Demon and Flipping Rope. Using Shadow Demon to bring the prey into attack range, and then using Flipping Rope beneath the bodies of the 2 cursed spirits. The natural shadows beneath the cursed energy bodies became the carrier for the Flipping Rope attack, easily shredding both of them. Fushiguro Shin only left behind the hands, which were wearing bracelets and still showed human structure. Nanami thought silently, with this level of cursed technique ability, wouldn't it be no problem for the current Shin to be ranked as first grade? He asked himself if he could do something similar, and to protect his younger brother, Megumi Fushiguro, was he willing to hide his strength and just be a grade 3 sorcerer? Fushiguro Shin took out his phone and took a photo of the hand on the ground. As I thought. Nanami asked, what's wrong? Fushiguro Shin showed the photo on his phone to the 2 and explained, these 2 don't look like simple cursed spirits. They can be captured by a camera. Then that means. Fushiguro Shin voiced Nanami's suspicion. Then it means that although their forms are those of cursed spirits, their essence is human. Itadori looked at the 2 corpses and muttered, humans. About an hour later, after Shoko examined the 3 people in the movie theater and the corpses Fushiguro Shin had cut into pieces, she called Fushiguro Shin. These are all humans. Or perhaps I should say, before they were turned into this, they were all humans. The 3 people listening to the speakerphone didn't look too surprised. After all, they had guessed as much before, and it was just confirmed by Shoko. Fushiguro Shin said, Simply put, there's no possibility of restoration, right, Shoko-san? There's no way. Even if the opponent used the same cursed technique, it's basically impossible to restore this level of deformation to its original state. Understood. Also, Shin. What is it, Shoko-san? Even if you can solve it easily, don't cut the corpses into such small pieces. It makes my research very difficult. Sorry, I'll definitely pay attention next time. After Fushiguro Shin hung up the phone, Itadori said angrily, to do something like this, it's just too cruel. It's a bit heavy. Nanami-senpai, I'm going out for some fresh air. Nanami didn't think much of it and casually agreed. Just then, Kiyotaka Aijichi walked in with a map. Where is Shin going? Nanami looked at the map in Kiyotaka Aijichi's hand and asked curiously. He said he was going out for some fresh air. What are you holding? Earlier today, Shin asked me for reports on recent disappearances and incidents with abnormal deaths in this vicinity, as well as related residue reports. I thought it would be helpful, so I organized them in detail on a map. What? Nanami thought of something and immediately took the map to examine it. Meanwhile, Fushiguro Shin had already arrived at the entrance of the sewer where Mahito was hiding. Whether it was solving the movie theater problem in advance or arriving here at an incredible speed, it had saved a significant amount of time. If Fushiguro Shin's calculations were correct, Yoshino Junpei should be inside chatting with Mahito right now. Fushiguro Shin looked up at the gloomy sky and muttered to himself, a cloudy day, huh? That really helps a lot. Experience consumed, activating two-way heavenly restriction. Fushiguro Shin reached his hand into the shadow and said coldly. Flipping rope. Instantly, countless sounds of cutting echoed from the pitch-black sewer. The young man named Yoshino Junpei asked Mahito, who was standing before him. Mahito, what kind of curse are you? Humanity. I am a curse born from the hatred and fear humans feel toward one another. Mahito, who had been conversing with Yoshino Junpei, felt the sudden explosion of Fushiguro Shin's massive cursed energy. Startled, he immediately sat up from his hammock. What is this? It wasn't just the massive cursed energy, the sound of things being sliced also reached him in a continuous, dense barrage. The sound of stone being sliced, bricks being sliced, rusty pipes being sliced, sewage being sliced, and the sound of Mahito's transfigured human's flesh being sliced. Without giving Mahito any chance to think, that mysterious and murderous sensation rapidly approached from the shadows in the distance. He watched helplessly as Yoshino Junpei, the core of his plan, was instantly shredded by those shadows, blood and flesh splattering everywhere. Is that shadow a cursed technique? By the time Mahito realized this, his body had already begun to experience the agony of being continuously severed. Instinct drove Mahito to move toward the faint light shining down from the square manhole cover of the drainage canal above. But the cross structure of that square manhole cover likewise cast shadows upon Mahito's body, which meant they could also become Fushiguro Shin's flipping rope. Nanami immediately realized that Fushiguro Shin intended to solve the problem alone. Intuition told Nanami that Fushiguro Shin must have sensed something to choose to act independently. After all, since Fushiguro Shin was the one who handled those two special cursed spirits, he might be withholding some information. Was the enemy too strong, or did he discover that the risk of the opponent's soul transfiguring technique was too high? Nanami had no way of determining which possibility it was for the time being. But regardless of which one it was, it indicated that the upcoming events were not suitable for Itadori's participation. The risk was too high for someone who had just become a jujutsu sorcerer, the rest needed to be handled by himself as an adult. From the map provided by Kiyotaka Aijichi, Nanami also discovered that all the residuals pointed toward the sewer where Mahito was hiding. It was as if saying, I'm right here, jujutsu sorcerers, come quickly. Nanami adjusted his glasses and said, Itadori, wait here for a moment. I'm going out. Itadori wasn't completely oblivious and asked, is Nanami-sensei going to find Shin? Itadori, I do not hold a teaching position at Jujutsu High, so do not address me as Sensei. Then, Nanami High. Watch it or I'll hit you. Whatever, just stay here and wait for me to return. As Nanami spoke, he stood up and straightened his suit, preparing to leave. Right at that moment, an untimely voice rang out in the room. Idiot, they're preparing to abandon you now. If you don't follow them, I'll come out and go on a rampage, starting by killing the weakest one first. The speaker was Sukuna inside Itadori's body, speaking through a mouth that appeared on the side of Itadori's face. Whether it was Kiyotaka Ijichi, whom Sukuna singled out to kill, or Nanami, who was about to leave, they both turned their heads in unison to look at Itadori. Itadori hurriedly covered Sukuna's mouth and said, I didn't say that. This guy pops out occasionally. Though Sukuna's mouth was covered, it quickly shifted to the back of Itadori's hand, continuing its arrogant shouting. My patience is limited. You'd better move quickly. Hearing Sukuna's words, Nanami's expression turned very grim. He hadn't expected the situation to turn out like this. Though he didn't know Sukuna's purpose for insisting that Itadori follow along. After hearing such a threat from Sukuna, Nanami couldn't just sit idly by. Fushiguro Shin, who was presumably facing the enemy alone, Itadori, the rookie who had just become a jujutsu sorcerer, and the time-bomb Sukuna on this rookie, who knew not when he would explode. As expected, the work of a jujutsu sorcerer sucks. While the room fell into a brief silence, a terrifying surge of cursed energy erupted in the distance. And a surge of cursed energy of that magnitude could only belong to Fushiguro Shin, who had left alone. In that instant, Nanami cut through the confusion in his mind and made a decision. Ijichi, drive. Itadori, keep Sukuna under control, don't let him come out as he pleases. Yes. Got it, Nanami High. To make Fushiguro Shin use this level of power, Nanami could only assume the opponent was a special grade level existence. Fushiguro Shin stopped his flipping rope for a full 30 seconds and walked to where Mahito was. He looked at the fragments of Mahito writhing and piecing themselves together all over the ground and said calmly. As expected, it's impossible to kill you by targeting only your physical body. Mahito's eyes stared at Fushiguro Shin as he questioned, who are you? Fushiguro Shin slowly drew the cursed tool, Kai, which was stored within the shadows. Drawing the blade, he answered flatly. That's not important. Just someone who's going to exorcise you. Fushiguro Shin's current reason for acting was very simple. He wanted to see the extent of his current power before the Shibuya incident, specifically when facing targets against whom Malevolent Shrine was ineffective or produced poor results. Fushiguro Shin naturally knew that Mahito wasn't that easy to kill, but the price the system offered for killing Mahito was a full 150,000 experience points. It forced Fushiguro Shin to come and experience it for himself. Even if he couldn't kill him, using him as a sandbag was perfectly fine. Seizing this opportunity, Mahito controlled his hands to transform and enlarge, instantly shooting them toward Fushiguro Shin in a sneak attack. Fushiguro Shin watched Mahito's attack without a hint of panic in his eyes, instead muttering to himself. Even in this environment, you still won't give up on attacking me. Mahito felt a flicker of doubt in his heart. What did those strange words mean? Could he still use that move from earlier at will? Did this guy have that much cursed energy? Fushiguro Shin lightly swung his blade toward those massive fists, his mouth reciting. 10 Shadows Technique. Bansho. As the blade's edge swept across Mahito's fists, they were instantly repelled in the opposite direction as if like poles of magnets had touched, while simultaneously bursting with countless sprays of blood. What? Mahito couldn't understand what had happened as he was slammed against the wall behind him by the resulting force. 10 Shadows Technique. Bansho. When launching an attack on an enemy, it increases one's attack intensity and cursed energy output based on how much of their surface area is covered by shadows. And Mahito, by enlarging his body, just happened to allow more of his surface area to be shrouded in shadows. If Bansho provided roughly a 100% boost against a normal person completely covered in shadows, then for Mahito, who had enlarged his body, that 100% value would be multiplied many times over. If Fushiguro Shin's cat's cradle was still within the realm of Mahito's understanding, then Bansho was undoubtedly an ability that, without explanation, Mahito could not comprehend on his own. Troublesome. This was Mahito's first impression of Fushiguro Shin. As Mahito rapidly regenerated himself, he spoke up. I never expected someone so young to already feel no guilt over killing. Or do you also despise humans? While attempting to distract Fushiguro Shin with words, Mahito morphed his arm into the shape of a gun barrel, preparing to abandon close combat and attack from range. But before Mahito could take aim, Fushiguro Shin's figure vanished from his sight, replaced by a slash that pierced his chest from behind and cleaved him in two. Fushiguro Shin knew perfectly well that Mahito was referring to the act of killing Yoshino Junpei. But compared to the events that would unfold later at the school, if killing just one person could prevent all that, was there any better choice? Fushiguro Shin replied without emotion, I merely set them free, that's all. Mahito, feeling the inhuman agony, violently vomited a large mouthful of blood. When did he get behind me? Mahito realized it then. From the start until now, he hadn't laid a finger on Fushiguro Shin. This was the first time Mahito felt as weak as those ordinary humans he used to toy with at his whim. Mahito made a snap decision, splitting his body into countless fragments, each resembling an egg with legs. He had to escape this underground space. Even if he hadn't figured out this guy's cursed technique, if it was related to shadows, getting out of the shadow-covered area was definitely the right move. Watching Mahito scatter and flee in all directions, Fushiguro Shin said coldly, I don't believe I gave you permission to leave. 10 Shadows Technique. Wooden Man. 10 Shadows Technique. Wooden Man. After activation, if the target fails to move both feet out of the shadow's coverage within 3 seconds, they will be bound by the shadow. Wooden Man. This was something Mahito knew about, a game human children play. So, does it require the body to stop moving? Thinking this, Mahito commanded some of his fragments to halt and stay put. But unfortunately, 3 seconds later, all of Mahito's fragments were tightly ensnared by shadows. Wrong guess. What the hell is up with this guy's curse technique? Fushiguro Shin sneered coldly. Hard to kill doesn't mean impossible to kill. Your regeneration isn't without cost either. So, let me experiment. How many times do I have to kill you to truly end you? Immediately after, Fushiguro Shin precisely controlled the range of Cat's Cradle, subjecting each of Mahito's fragments to a continuous, meat grinder-like shredding. Feeling that familiar sensation of being torn apart, Mahito couldn't help but think Fushiguro Shin resembled a curse or a cursed spirit more than a jujutsu sorcerer. This malice was too pure, untainted by any other impurities. If this continued, he might actually be worn down and killed here. As the main body of Mahito prepared to open its mouth, Fushiguro Shin's icy words rang out again. Trash, did I permit you to move? 10 Shadows Technique. Kujiboku self-embodiment of perfection. This kind of interruption only applies to techniques with obvious activation motions. It does not apply to hindering something like Fushiguro Shin's own malevolent shrine, which requires no preparatory action. Once Fushiguro Shin finished the activation, Mahito's mouth was forcibly sealed shut. The shadows within his oral cavity solidified, completely shredding the small hands that were about to complete the hand sign to unleash his domain. Mahito was utterly shocked. Why did he hear the name of his own domain, which he hadn't even used yet, from Fushiguro Shin's mouth? How did he know about self-embodiment of perfection? Moreover, his domain expansion was thwarted in less than a fraction of a second after starting. Did that guy anticipate his domain expansion in advance? Countless questions mixed with the agony of having his flesh pulverized every moment. He couldn't figure it out, he just couldn't. Mahito felt he was going insane. Despite the massive drain from his failed domain expansion attempt, even at the risk of depleting his cursed energy entirely, Mahito was determined to activate his domain once more. Ignoring his shredded mouth, spewing blood and screaming hoarsely, all his body fragments temporarily abandoned merging and regeneration. Instead, they unanimously transformed into as many arms as possible to unleash the domain. Domain expansion. Self-embodiment of perfection. This time, Fushiguro Shin did not use Kujiboku again. Instead, He stood there silently, allowing Mahito to use domain expansion, self-embodiment of perfection. Mahito's domain enveloped nearly the entire sewer. Within the domain, countless arms wove together to form a massive cage. The Mahito who was regenerating his body laughed maniacally. I truly want to thank you now. But the Fushiguro Shishin opposite him paid no heed. Instead, he vanished before Mahito's eyes. Vanished in the literal sense, because that was never Fushiguro Shin's true body to begin with. Mahito felt as if he had plummeted from heaven to hell. Frantically, he clawed at his own head, his gaze rapidly scanning every corner of the domain. No. Impossible. He was clearly brought in by me. He was clearly trapped inside my domain. Due to the massive depletion of cursed energy, Mahito's domain gradually dissipated. A familiar and terrifying voice echoed through the space. Are you finished? Then let's continue. Seeing Fushiguro Shin's cold, detached face once more, Mahito's fear completely overflowed, washing away the last shreds of reason in his mind. Ah. 10 Shadows Technique. Shadow concealment. In combat, people often unconsciously rely on vision and perception of cursed energy to fight. Especially in environments like this one, and given Fushiguro Shin's astonishing agility, Mahito couldn't reliably track his location visually. Naturally, he would resort to sensing Shin's immense cursed energy to locate his enemy. Shadow concealment exploits this reliance on perception over sight. It uses cursed energy to create false afterimages, deceiving the opponent's senses. Upon detecting Mahito's intent to expand his domain again, Fushiguro Shin immediately released Shadow Demon to retreat swiftly. During this process, he activated Shadow Concealment. Furthermore, during this transition, he temporarily deactivated the two-way heavenly restriction. By lowering his own cursed energy as an additional measure, he made it even harder for Mahito to realize that the shadow concealment wasn't his true body. Suddenly, in an instant, Fushiguro Shin found the concrete floor beneath his feet vanish, replaced by a bottomless abyss. Fushiguro Shin's first reaction was that this wasn't Mahito's doing, but Kenjaku, disguised as Geto Suguru, had arrived. The moment before his body felt weightless, Fushiguro Shin had already made a decision. On one hand, he lacked a means to directly attack the soul, so it would take time to wear Mahito down. If he had to deal with Kenjaku disguised as Geto Suguru at the same time, it would truly be too much. The reason he could suppress Mahito to this extent was largely due to this dark home field advantage. But in a 2-on-1, if the area was destroyed, it wouldn't be easy to maintain this level of suppression. Even with Nanami and Itadori, they couldn't bridge the gap here. Fushiguro Shin immediately used Shadow Demon to escape from the spot. In that brief gap, Fushiguro Shin's eyes met those of Geto Suguru, who was quickly leaving with Mahito. Before his true name is exposed, he will still be referred to as Geto Suguru. Geto Suguru recognized him at a glance, it was Toji's eldest son. Seeing Fushiguro Shin vanish into the shadows, Geto Suguru's brow furrowed slightly. He couldn't help but wonder, wasn't Fushiguro Shin's reaction a bit too fast? Even against a first-grade or special-grade jujutsu sorcerer, Geto Suguru was confident the great goldfish could affect them, creating a momentary opening. It seemed Fushiguro Shin stopping the special-grade cursed spirit in Sukuna last time wasn't a coincidence, he truly possessed that level of strength. Geto Suguru quickly left the area with Mahito. Geto Suguru looked at Mahito, who rarely showed fear on his face, and asked, what happened? This wasn't part of the plan. Are you alright? Mahito's body kept regenerating as he trembled, saying, so scary, I almost really died. Hearing this, Geto Suguru's expression changed slightly. Almost killed Mahito. Geto Suguru knew Mahito's situation well. From a killability standpoint, Mahito was extremely difficult to deal with, and his escape skills were top tier. So he continued curiously, is he your natural enemy? Can he attack your soul? Mahito just held his head, repeating distractedly, shadows, shadows, shadows. Geto Suguru realized the shock was too great this time, he needed to wait for Mahito to calm down and return to normal before getting more information. Recalling Fushiguro Shin's maneuver of entering the shadows to leave, Geto Suguru began searching his memory for all shadow-related curse techniques. The result was obvious. The strongest should be the Zenin family's 10 Shadows technique. Moreover, Fushiguro Shin carried the blood of the Zenin family. Although there were no recorded cases of a reverse heavenly restriction awakening a cursed technique, awakening the 10 Shadows technique was within the realm of possibility. But the biggest problem was that the 10 Shadows technique in his memory wasn't something that could push Mahito to this extent. Even with the strongest move of the 10 Shadows technique, given Mahito's abilities, he should have been able to escape even if he couldn't win. Thinking of this, Geto Suguru glanced at Mahito again, who was still in a state of shock and weakness, completely lacking his usual composure as a cursed spirit. In this state, how could he not have tried to escape? So, it's a shadow technique different from the 10 Shadows technique, yet capable of rivaling it. Geto Suguru shook his head with a smile, murmuring to himself. Fushiguro Shin, is this a case of, like father, like son? Truly a headache. At this stage, the clues could only support his reasoning this far, the rest would have to wait for Mahito to provide more intel. At least based on current information, the strength Fushiguro Shin displayed in his actions would undoubtedly create variables in his plan. When Nanami and the others arrived, they only saw Fushiguro Shin sitting at the entrance of the sewer. Seeing Nanami's expression, which was slightly angry yet mixed with concern, Fushiguro Shin spoke directly. The culprit is a humanoid cursed spirit of at least special grade. He has high intelligence and can communicate normally. I couldn't kill him, he was taken away by a companion. Nanami processed Fushiguro Shin's words, those few sentences contained a lot of information. Hearing the words, special grade cursed spirit, Eiichi Kiyotaka's face turned pale, and he took out his phone to start drafting a message. Hearing, special grade cursed spirit, Itadori unconsciously thought of his previous experiences, and his expression changed as well. Nanami asked with a hint of reproach, Shin, why did you act on your own? I just didn't want you to get involved. He isn't an enemy suited for you to face, Nanami-senpai. Nanami's brow furrowed slightly. Thinking his explanation was inadequate, Fushiguro Shin added, I don't mean to question your strength, Nanami-senpai, but his ability can reshape someone's body just by touching them. He's really not suitable for a close combat jujutsu sorcerer like you. Besides, he can use a domain, you understand, right? Though Fushiguro Shin didn't continue, Nanami understood his meaning. If dragged into a domain, a cursed technique with that effect would be almost certain death under the domain's guaranteed hit effect. Fushiguro Shin lowered his head and spoke seriously, I'll accept it even if you blame me, Nanami-senpai, but if given the choice again, I would still act this way. Nanami suddenly found it a bit funny. Was the first person he worried about not Itadori, but himself as the senior. Well, Sukuna resided in Itadori's body, Sukuna wouldn't just sit by if there was danger. He hadn't expected that he had now become a burden to be worried about by his junior. Although their strengths were now vastly different, Nanami was certain that Fushiguro Shin was still the same Fushiguro Shin he knew. Nanami's favorability increased to 25. Gained 500 experience. Nanami patted Fushiguro Shin's shoulder and said, don't do this again. No matter what your strength is now, I have no reason to let you face danger alone. But I am the adult, and you are the child. I have an obligation to protect you first. Killed Yoshino Junpei. Significantly altered, young fish and reverse punishment. Gained a total of 30,000 experience reward. Nanami stepped into the sewer, looking at the sharp cuts everywhere and the metallic scent of the large patches of dark red blood. Nanami could already imagine how terrifyingly intense the battle had been. He then thought of how Fushiguro Shin, whom he had just seen, didn't have a single wound on his body. So Shin might be even stronger than I imagined, he really was worried about me. Nanami reached this conclusion in his heart. Gojo Satoru gestured with both hands and asked, was the guy who saved him a cursed spirit with a volcano on his head? Fushiguro Shin shook his head silently. Seeing Fushiguro Shin shake his head, Gojo Satoru continued, not that one. Then did he have tree branches growing out of his eye sockets? Fushiguro Shin thought for a moment and replied, no. The companion with him looked like a human with a strand of bangs on the left side of his forehead. He might be a jujutsu sorcerer or a curse user. A strand of bangs is too vague a description. Any details about his clothing? No, just simple black clothes. There was indeed too little information, but Gojo Satoru didn't dwell on it too much and continued asking Fushiguro Shin. Does your domain have a way to work on that guy? Nanami, who was listening quietly on the side, frowned. What kind of question was that? No, he isn't a target my domain can affect. When Nanami heard Fushiguro Shin mention earlier that Mahito could use a domain, he subconsciously assumed Fushiguro Shin had also mastered a domain and thus wouldn't be affected by Mahito's sure hit effect. Nanami couldn't help but interject, your domain can't affect him. Can it neutralize his sure hit effect then? Fushiguro Shin shook his head. Gojo Satoru looked at the surprised Nanami and explained with a smile, oh, I forgot. Nanami, you didn't fight alongside Shin this time, so you probably don't know. His domain only works on specific targets, and it comes with a powerful binding vow that makes it ineffective against everyone else, allowing them to enter and exit at will. What? Nanami was momentarily stunned by such an exaggerated binding vow. Then how did you fight against his domain? Gojo Satoru also looked over. Clearly, this was the question he originally wanted to ask as well. Fushiguro Shin simply stated calmly, his domain didn't hit me. I reacted immediately and dodged it. Dodge the domain. Dodge the domain. Clearly, Nanami and Gojo Satoru had completely different reactions. Nanami's understanding was completely overturned. It was the first time he'd heard that the word dodge could be used in the same sentences, domain. Gojo Satoru, on the other hand, felt that something this ridiculous was exactly the kind of thing that would happen with Fushiguro Shin. Gojo Satoru said excitedly, do you want to try dodging my unlimited void? Fushiguro Shin rolled his eyes and answered categorically, I can't dodge that. Gojo Satoru dropped his playful expression and said seriously to the two of them, however, based on your information, that guy is indeed quite troublesome. For other jujutsu sorcerers, facing him directly without information would be an absolute disaster. Your judgment at the time was correct, but don't push yourself too hard. Nanami adjusted his glasses, still not recovered from the shock. Fushiguro Shin had given him too many shocks in a short period of time. He even began to feel that it was somehow reasonable for the two people in front of him to discuss such matters so casually. Fushiguro Shin followed the topic and pressed Gojo Satoru, so, to avoid this kind of situation, you promised to teach me the new shadow style last time. When can you make good on that? How about now? Do you have a problem with that? Gojo Satoru said, tilting his head. Fushiguro Shin got up from the sofa, prepared to learn. Let's begin. The teaching of the new shadow style actually started so casually, and in a room like this. And so, under Nanami's bewildered gaze, Gojo Satoru began his explanation of the new shadow style, simple domain. Gojo Satoru's explanation of the new shadow style included vague, intuitive phrases like, it feels similar to when you use a domain. Listening to Gojo Satoru's teaching, Nanami almost couldn't resist asking, can anyone actually learn from this? Finally, Gojo Satoru personally manifested the new shadow style, simple domain, letting Fushiguro Shin experience it firsthand as the conclusion to the lesson. Seeing the lesson end, Nanami finally couldn't help but ask Gojo Satoru, that's it. It's over. Gojo Satoru nodded slightly and spoke, it should be enough, right? The explanation was quite complete, and I even let him experience it once. Shin will be able to learn it. Nanami shook his head helplessly. Based on that teaching alone, even as a grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer, he wouldn't dare say how much of the new shadow style's content he could grasp. Coupled with Gojo Satoru's terrible teaching skills, Nanami found it truly hard to imagine that Fushiguro Shin could master the new shadow style, simple domain just like that. Gojo Satoru looked at the contemplating Fushiguro Shin and said to Nanami, don't worry. His talent as a jujutsu sorcerer is astonishing. Besides, he's already mastered a domain, so the new shadow style, simple domain isn't too difficult for him. Is that so? Nanami was still skeptical. Fushiguro Shin made his first attempt, following Gojo Satoru's explanation and his first-hand experience of the simple domain, supplemented by his own understanding of domains. In the eyes of Gojo Satoru and Nanami, Fushiguro Shin's first attempt was undoubtedly a failure. His simple domain collapsed before it could even take shape. But for Fushiguro Shin, it was already a success, because that familiar voice was already ringing in his ears. Mastered new shadow style. Simple domain level 4, 0/500ths. Increasing the level will reduce the corresponding cursed energy consumption, increase the range, and unlock exclusive derivative effects. Fushiguro Shin didn't hesitate and immediately invested a large amount of experience, raising it to the semi-first grade level. New shadow style. Simple domain level 1, 0/50,000ths. Unlocked derived skill. New shadow style. Shadow prison. New shadow style. Shadow prison, capable of neutralizing the sure hit effects of other domains. When activated, it creates a circular area centered on the user, condensing shadows within that space into a lightless cage. After deactivation, the shadows can still linger for 1 second. Seeing Fushiguro Shin standing there expressionless, Nanami wanted to go up and comfort him, thinking it was normal to fail the first time with that kind of teaching method. Fushiguro Shin spoke up. I think I've mastered it. With that, the two-way heavenly restriction activated, and Fushiguro Shin's terrifying cursed energy erupted. Feeling Fushiguro Shin's cursed energy from such a close distance for the first time, Nanami was quite surprised. He hadn't expected Fushiguro Shin to be this strong. Fushiguro Shin chanted in a low voice, "New shadow style, shadow prison." Immediately, a pitch-black circle spread out from beneath Fushiguro Shin's feet, with a radius of about 3 meters, instantly enveloping the three of them. In the next instant, countless shadows rose from the perimeter of the circle, condensing into a hemispherical, lightless domain. Nanami looked around the pitch-black new shadow style, shadow prison in shock, muttering in disbelief, "This." Gojo Satoru pointed at Fushiguro Shin and asked Nanami with a laugh, "See. He's already learned it. I really do have a talent for teaching, don't I?" Nanami's worldview was now being hammered to the point of shattering, and the calm expression on his face had long since vanished. At the foot of Mount Mushiro near Jujutsu High, 6 hours remained until the bounty expired. Toji, who had been lying in wait early on, spotted someone who absolutely should not have been there at this time. Toji spoke in surprise, "Shin. Why are you here?" Although they hadn't seen each other for a long time, Toji still recognized his eldest son. Fushiguro Shin had used the money he had saved through frugality to take public transport, finally relying on the powerful physique granted by his heavenly restriction to rush here, all to stop Toji. If he hadn't known this location, it would have been difficult for Fushiguro Shin to find his father, who had abandoned them to wander around like a vagrant. With his still somewhat youthful face, Fushiguro Shin spoke up, "Can you just for today, stop doing your job and come back to see Megumi and Sumiki?" But clearly, Toji was more concerned at the moment that if even his own child could find this place, did it mean his plan of action had been exposed? Toji dialed a number. "You fool, did you tell the kid about the operation?" On the other end of the line, Kong Shiu was completely bewildered. "What are you talking about? Why would I tell anyone about your operation? And what's going on with your kid?" Fushiguro Shin spoke before Toji could say another word. "In 2 hours, Gojo Satoru will bring the star plasma vessel through here to return inside the Jujutsu High Barrier." Toji froze upon hearing this and covered the phone's receiver. "Shin, what did you just say?" Fushiguro Shin simply continued on his own. "In the beginning of your fight with Gojo Satoru, you will have the upper hand, but on the brink of death, he will grasp the reverse curse technique. Father, you will die. Can't you just give up?" Although he wasn't sure who had told Fushiguro Shin these things, Toji dismissed them as mere childish jokes and didn't think much else of it. Not until he saw the tears streaming down Fushiguro Shin's earnest face. Only then did Toji remember the extraordinary nature his eldest son, Fushiguro Shin, had displayed since he was little. But Toji still chose to say to Kong Shiu on the other end, "Do me a favor. Come here now and take my kid away. If you don't hurry, it might affect the plan." Though Kong Shiu was completely baffled, he knew the importance of the upcoming plan, so he suppressed his doubts and set off immediately. Toji scratched his head, sighed helplessly, and said to Fushiguro Shin, "Someone will pick you up in a bit." Seeing Toji's expression, Fushiguro Shin knew his father hadn't taken his words seriously. Fushiguro Shin still didn't give up and pressed further, "Even if it's just my selfishness, father, can't you give up on this mission?" This was indeed the first time Toji had ever heard a selfish request from Fushiguro Shin in all their time together. Toji looked down at his eldest son and replied, "I can't do that. I've already accepted the 30 million yen deposit. This is work. I just need to finish this one last time." Fushiguro Shin's final words to Toji were, "Then please, father, you must make sure to kill Gojo Satoru. You must, absolutely must, confirm that he is dead." But unfortunately, in the heat of that intense battle, Toji had no time to recall Fushiguro Shin's words. The next moment, the scene shifted. It was no longer the foot of Mount Mushiro at Jujutsu High. Before Fushiguro Shin's eyes, the left side of his father's body was completely gouged out, blood and organs staining his originally pure white pants. Fushiguro Shin looked at his own hands, which were tightly gripping the inverted spear of heaven. Turning his head, he saw the culprit, Gojo Satoru, with a calm expression. Filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow, Fushiguro Shin screamed at the top of his lungs. "I'm going to kill you." The dream ended abruptly there. This was the nightmare that had repeated every single day since his father Toji's death. Fushiguro Shin sat up from his soaked pillow, clutching his head with both hands to calm himself down. He had to do this every day to steady himself so that he could face his father's killer as his student and lead a peaceful life. To grow stronger for his goals, Fushiguro Shin needed to be the kindest person at Jujutsu High, Principal Yaga's most satisfactory student, Shoko's secret smoking buddy, and the grade 3 sorcerer with perfect attendance who never complained about missions. Fushiguro Shin muttered tremulously to himself, "Soon, it won't be much longer. I will end all of this, and both Megumi and Sumiki will be able to live happy lives." With only a month left until the Goodwill event, it wasn't exactly long, but it wasn't short either. Due to the impact of the Mahito incident, Fushiguro Shin hadn't exactly been idle. Gojo Satoru assigned Fushiguro Shin to various missions as a grade 3 sorcerer to prevent any unexpected incidents. But Fushiguro Shin knew the enemy wouldn't choose to act at this time, at least according to his memories. While on missions with Nanami, Fushiguro Shin took the initiative to share his insights on new shadow style, simple domain. He hoped Nanami could master this technique before the Shibuya incident. Of course, Nanami himself had shown an interest in learning new shadow style, simple domain because of the Mahito incident. Although having a junior teach him felt somewhat awkward for Nanami. But when he thought of Gojo Satoru's teaching ability, he naturally chose Fushiguro Shin. Before the Kyoto Jujutsu High Goodwill event began, Gojo Satoru sought out Fushiguro Shin privately. "Because of what happened last time, you incapacitated Kyoto's Aoi Todo, so in exchange, your participation has also been banned." Fushiguro Shin frowned. In the Goodwill event, Megumi Fushiguro was supposed to be injured by Hanami. Now that Aoi Todo had been incapacitated by him and he wasn't allowed to participate, who would protect Megumi Fushiguro? "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Gojo Satoru said with a smile, "Because this was a condition Principal Yaga only recently negotiated with him. Don't worry, even so, we have an absolute numerical advantage." Gojo then added, "If Kyoto's Aoi Todo were still able to fight, he'd probably be the only one who could stall you for a bit. Since he's out, you should give Megumi some room to grow, right?" Fushiguro Shin said, displeased. He can grow perfectly well under my protection. It doesn't matter if it's a bit slower. There's no need to take risks. Just leave his part to me." Gojo Satoru said calmly, "That's a bit overprotective, isn't it?" "No can do. I'm not asking for your consent, I'm just informing you. With our parents gone, I am the head of this family. Protecting my family is my responsibility. Fushiguro Shin stared at Gojo Satoru and continued, I can refrain from participating, and I can even make a binding vow not to harm any Kyoto Jujutsu High students during the Goodwill event, but I must be there to watch with my own eyes. Just during the Goodwill event, huh? Gojo Satoru thought for a moment. Since you've put it that way, I have no reason to refuse. However, you must not interfere with the normal proceedings of the event. I promise. On the day of the Goodwill event, everyone from Tokyo Jujutsu High was waiting for the arrival of the personnel from Kyoto Jujutsu High. Although there was a small episode where Kugisaki misunderstood something, everyone just laughed it off. Seeing Fushiguro Shin, who hadn't shown his face for a month, everyone was exceptionally enthusiastic. Because Itadori had been practicing with everyone from time to time, it didn't really feel like a long-awaited reunion for him. Upon seeing Fushiguro Shin, Maki was the first to complain, honestly, you suddenly vanished despite what you promised. Fushiguro Shin made a gesture of begging for mercy and apologized. Sorry, because I revealed my true strength, I was dragged off to be used as labor. Once things aren't so busy, I'll definitely spar with Senior Maki. As he spoke, Fushiguro Shin opened his phone, which was densely packed with mission requests from the past month. Maki took the phone and flipped through the mission logs, while the others leaned in curiously to take a look. This. Megumi Fushiguro stared blankly at the massive volume of missions. He hadn't expected that when Fushiguro Shin was busy, he would handle 4 or 5 missions a day, even when the locations were very far apart. Megumi Fushiguro suddenly felt a sense of shame. Even though he possessed a domain and had obtained the title of second-grade Jujutsu sorcerer earlier than his brother, Fushiguro Shin, and was currently being evaluated for promotion to first grade. He not only lacked the ability to stand on his own but even felt cowardice when facing a special grade. Meanwhile, his older brother had been hiding his strength all along, staying by his side to protect him. Ultimately, it was because he was a burden to his brother. Fushiguro Shin looked at Megumi Fushiguro, whose expression seemed off, and said, I won't be able to participate with you this time. Let me see the results of your month of training. Panda and Kugisaki were the first to react, asking in surprise, Shin, you're not participating. Everyone felt that even though Okatsu wasn't here this time, with Fushiguro Shin present, they would surely crush Kyoto Jujutsu High with ease. Hearing this, Satoru Gojo wagged his finger and said, you can't rely on others. For certain reasons, Shin won't be representing Tokyo Jujutsu High this time, but he will be at the scene to observe your battles. Beside him, Yaga looked bewildered and asked, what did you just say? I don't remember arranging such a thing. Yaga's brow furrowed upon hearing this demand. It was at this moment that the personnel from Kyoto Jujutsu High arrived, and Yoshinobu Gakuganji also asked with a frown. What did you just say? Satoru Gojo glanced at Yoshinobu Gakuganji with a smile and explained, I just said that Shin will be responsible for patrolling the battle site. If any problems arise, he can handle them immediately. He won't interfere with the exchange event. Yoshinobu Gakuganji's face darkened slightly, clearly contemplating how this sudden development would affect his plans. If that was the case, would he step in to stop them when they killed Itadori? Seeing Yoshinobu Gakuganji remain silent, Satoru Gojo continued to explain, you can rest easy this time. Shin has already set a binding vow for himself, he will not attack the students of Kyoto Jujutsu High during the competition. Yaga's expression softened. If that was the case, it wasn't unacceptable. The teachers of the high school would only be outside the venue, responsible for monitoring through the transmitted images. Given that Fushiguro Shin definitely wouldn't lose control, he could be considered the most reliable student besides the teachers. With him there, one really wouldn't have to worry about unexpected situations. Especially with the recent incident involving Mahito and the existence of Itadori, one really needed to pay attention to sudden emergencies. Since it had reached the point of a binding vow, Yoshinobu Gakuganji naturally had no reason to object. Under normal circumstances, the students of Kyoto Jujutsu High would have felt that Tokyo Jujutsu High was taking it easy because Yuta Okatsu hadn't come. But because of Fushiguro Shin's appearance, all of that had changed. Although the people from Kyoto Jujutsu High had never met Fushiguro Shin, they all recognized him from photographs. Naturally, they were all aware that the person being surrounded on the Tokyo side was Fushiguro Shin. Likewise, they weren't deceived by the gentle appearance on Fushiguro Shin's face. From the photos they had received, they had already witnessed Aoi Todo's miserable state. They were also quite shocked that someone of Aoi Todo's strength could be beaten to such an extent without any ability to fight back. Even the hands he used to perform boogie woogie had been directly severed. They all simultaneously recalled Yoshinobu Gakuganji's instructions before they departed. I have already requested that Fushiguro Shin, who injured Aoi Todo, be prohibited from participating in the exchange event, so you don't need to worry about him. However, there is one thing to note. Do not touch his younger brother, Megumi Fushiguro. Otherwise, it's hard to guarantee what he might do. Do not let it affect our plan, remember that. The plan Yoshinobu Gakuganji mentioned was, naturally, the plan for everyone to focus their fire and kill Itadori during the team battle of the exchange event. Everyone naturally looked toward Megumi Fushiguro. The target principal Yoshinobu Gakuganji had warned them absolutely never to harm. Kamo Noritoshi looked at Megumi Fushiguro and Fushiguro Shin, muttering to himself, both flow with the blood of the Zenin family, yet they are indeed much stronger than the main family. Tisk. Zenin Mai was annoyed, but she couldn't deny that what Kamo Noritoshi said was the truth. In fact, she still had lingering fears about what happened that day. If Aoi Todo hadn't sent Megumi Fushiguro flying back then, and if she hadn't been lecturing Kugasaki but had also participated in the intimidation of Megumi Fushiguro, would her hands still be there now? Ultimate Mekamaru stared at Fushiguro Shin, silently clenching his fist. From the known intelligence, he knew that Fushiguro Shin was also a being with a heavenly restriction. He also knew from the Aoi Todo incident that Fushiguro Shin not only possessed the powerful body brought by a reverse heavenly restriction but also somehow obtained an incredibly vast amount of cursed energy. He was unwilling. Why was he affected by a heavenly restriction that caused him to be born without a right hand and the flesh below his knees, with no sensation below his waist, and skin so fragile it couldn't even withstand moonlight, constantly accompanied by pain as if every pore in his body were being pierced by needles? Such a tragic price was paid to gain power. Why didn't Fushiguro Shin have to? Why could Fushiguro Shin exclusively enjoy the positive gains of a heavenly restriction without having to pay the price? And he, in order to restore his body, even needed to cooperate with those cursed spirits. Kokichi Muda, who was observing Fushiguro Shin through ultimate Mekamaru, muttered through gritted teeth. Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin, on what basis can you do this? Watching the interaction between Megumi Fushiguro and Fushiguro Shin, Mai thought of what Shin had done for Megumi, and for some reason, she felt a bit envious of that excessive protection. She always remembered that when they were little, Maki also protected her like Shin did, but when did it start to change? From the start, this goodwill event between Tokyo and Kyoto had been fairly normal. And because of Aoi Todo's absence, the pressure on the Tokyo Jujutsu High side was much lighter. Although Yoshinobu Gakuganji had planned to focus fire and kill Yuji Itadori, in the end, they were unable to succeed due to their numerical disadvantage. Eventually, it evolved into a series of one-on-one duels. Moreover, because of Shin Fushiguro's intimidation and Yoshinobu Gakuganji's prior instructions, naturally, no one faced off against Megumi Fushiguro. This even left Megumi Fushiguro somewhat frustrated for a while, as he could only go to help the others. But the anomaly occurred after the death of the Grade 1 cursed spirit specifically deployed by Kyoto Jujutsu High. A massive curtain enveloped the combat area. Shin Fushiguro, who had been closely monitoring the dynamics on the field, reacted immediately. Kanbu. Toge Inamaki pulled down his collar, assuming a combat stance. Toge Inamaki looked in shock at the charred remains of the Grade 1 cursed spirit before him. Walking out from behind it was Jago. Jago accelerated, arriving in front of Toge Inamaki in an instant. Jago's palm was just a hair's breadth away from touching Toge Inamaki's face. What would happen upon contact was naturally obvious. But the difference in power levels was simply too great. Toge Inamaki had no time to react at all. But in the next second, Toge Inamaki's body suddenly sank, evading the fatal blow, with only his hair being grazed. Those few strands of hair instantly burned and charred. It was Shin Fushiguro who used Shadow Demon to save him, preventing Toge Inamaki from being burned to death by Jago in their first encounter. Then the two appeared not far in front of Jago. As Shin Fushiguro looked at the special grade cursed spirit before him, not the original Hanami, but Jago, his expression turned cold. Could it be that this time, only the personnel had changed? Had Hanami not come? Just as he was thinking this, an explosion erupted on the other side, and massive trees rising into the air crashed into the building complex. This was trouble. Megumi Fushiguro was on Hanami's side, and he certainly couldn't leave the Jago in front of him alone. Shin Fushiguro himself wasn't confident about facing both Hanami and Jago at the same time. Alteration of the Kyoto Goodwill event completed. Saved Toge Inamaki's life after the alteration. Total experience reward. 5,500. Toge Inamaki's favorability increased to 20. Gained 200 experience. Kill Mahito during the Goodwill event to gain 200,000 experience. Kill Hanami to gain 200,000 experience. Kill Jago to gain 250,000 experience. Jago looked at Toge Inamaki, who had merged into the shadows to evade his cursed technique. He naturally recognized the owner of the technique beside Toge Inamaki, Shin Fushiguro, his target for this mission. Jago recalled Suguru Geto's instructions from that time. Suguru Geto had said to the three of them, besides going to Jujutsu High to retrieve the items, there is one more matter that needs to be handled. Jago asked, what else is there to do? I want you to kill Shin Fushiguro. Jago frowned and asked, who is that? Suguru Geto gave an, oh, and began to explain to them. Oh, you don't know the name yet. He's the first-year student from Jujutsu High who beat Mahito so badly he couldn't fight back. Hearing the name Shin Fushiguro, the man who had nearly killed him, Mahito, who had been leisurely soaking in the hot spring, was suddenly struck by terrifying memories and couldn't stop trembling. Finally, he muttered, Shin Fushiguro, shadows, shadows, no darkness. Hanami and Jago looked at Mahito, not expecting that even after nearly a month, the mental trauma Shin Fushiguro had inflicted on him was still so severe. Hanami took the initiative to ask for information on Shin Fushiguro, to be able to injure Mahito like that, and he's only a first year at Jujutsu High. Suguru Geto said, I haven't actually fought him myself, but from the information I've gathered, he should be one of the strongest Jujutsu sorcerers currently, second only to Satoru Gojo. But Jago felt it was just because Mahito hadn't been born for long and had suffered from a lack of experience. A first year at Jujutsu High, no matter how strong could he be? Suguru Geto thought for a moment and added, there's one thing I probably haven't mentioned. In the previous test using Sukuna's finger, Sukuna in his three-finger state was suppressed by him. Judging from his unharmed performance afterward, he won quite easily. Jago was stunned upon hearing this, then immediately cursed, you fool, you kept something like this from us until now. Suguru Geto smiled and said, I was just worried you'd make a wrong judgment about Sukuna's strength. Now that Mahito has experienced it personally, you should understand, it wasn't a problem with Sukuna, it was that his opponent, Shin Fushiguro, was too strong. Listen, Inamaki-senpai. Go help Megumi and the others now. The situation has changed. Don't stall with that cursed spirit over there until the curtain is lifted, do you hear me? But Toge Inamaki, feeling Jago's terrifying pressure, wanted to ask, if you're having everyone else fight that one, what about you? Shin Fushiguro saw Toge Inamaki's concern, but he directly used Shadow Demon to teleport him away, saying calmly, don't worry about me. Leave this place to me, and take care of Megumi for me. Jago directly summoned a volcano, erupting it right at Shin Fushiguro's position, and said harshly, "You must be Shin Fushiguro. How ridiculous, having the time to worry about others when death is at your doorstep." Shin Fushiguro, who knew Jago's moves inside out, naturally and easily evaded the attack using Shadow Demon. And appearing behind Jago, he landed a black flash right on his back, blasting him several meters away. But this strike didn't cause too much damage to Jago. Jago steadied his body and recalled the information about Shin Fushiguro. It really is a cursed technique related to shadows. Choosing to strike during the day was indeed a wise decision. From the rewards given by the system alone, it was clear that Jago carried the highest price. Shin Fushiguro said to Jago, "It's great that it's you who came." Hearing Shin Fushiguro's inexplicable words, Jago was bewildered, and even his prepared cursed technique faltered for a moment. Jago frowned and asked, "What are you talking about, brat?" Shin Fushiguro said coldly, "Because compared to Mahito, you are much easier to kill. Will you beg for mercy like that guy did?" With that, Shin Fushiguro activated the two-way heavenly restriction, and a surge of cursed energy erupted instantly. Jago immediately recalled Satoru Gojo's face when he had looked down on him not long ago. As expected of a student he taught. "Don't look down on me, kid. Maximum. Meteor." With Jago's release, that incomparably massive, blazing meteorite rapidly fell toward Fushiguro Shin. In fact, it was because Jago had noticed Mahito's failure that he didn't bother with testing and chose to use his full strength from the start. Trying to end it quickly with domain expansion's ultimate technique output. How laughable. Fushiguro Shin thought this as he easily dealt with Jago in close quarters combat. In just a single second, the two had already exchanged dozens of blows. But Jago was unable to touch Fushiguro Shin's body even once. Instead, Jago felt the boy's terrifying physical strength and cursed energy. How is he this strong? Compared to the feeling of powerlessness when fighting Gojo Satoru, Fushiguro Shin wasn't relying on high-level techniques, but rather seemed to suppress him through sheer brute force. Fushiguro Shin knew that Jago wanted to pin him down through close quarters combat so that he couldn't escape the meteorite's range of attack. But he didn't panic in the slightest. Instead, as the shadow of the massive meteorite loomed over them both, he silently raised his hand. 10 Shadows Technique. Wooden Man. Jago was instantly entangled by the shadows at his feet. Fushiguro Shin mocked him coldly, "Stop making me laugh. What? True humans. Do you really think you can hit me with that pathetic cursed technique without relying on a domain? You call this a domain expansion's ultimate technique? Don't you find it ridiculous that this is the ultimate secret of your cursed technique?" Jago's composure instantly shattered. The Fushiguro Shin before him was even more venomous than his teacher, Gojo Satoru, making him furious as the volcanoes on his ears and head boiled and erupted. "You fool brat, Dom." Fushiguro Shin seized this moment to use the trick he had carefully set up. "You really take the bait easily. 10 Shadows Technique. Kujiboku, Coffin of the Iron Mountain." In an instant, two thick shadow hands extended from the back of Jago's neck, prying his mouth open from above and below. At the same time, two shadow hands appeared on each of Jago's arms, bending all his fingers back and forcibly interfering with Jago's domain expansion, causing him to lose a significant amount of cursed energy. "Wah!" Jago shouted indistinctly. Fushiguro Shin quickly merged into the shadows, saying with a sneer, "So, trash, how many times a day can you use your domain?" Fushiguro Shin immediately used Shadow Demon to initiate high-speed movement, jumping from one shadow to another without any regard for cursed energy consumption, charging toward Hanami's location. Just as Jago was preparing to use his full strength without hesitation to tear this arrogant brat to pieces, he never expected the boy to actually run away. Realizing he had been played, Jago was beyond furious. Terrifying heat radiated from his body, turning the trees and forest into a sea of fire. Right after, the domain expansion's ultimate technique, meteor released by Jago crashed heavily onto the ground. The massive impact made the earth tremble, a force that even those outside the curtain could feel. The failure of domain expansion's ultimate technique, Meteor, the forced suppression of his domain, and the extreme humiliation from Fushiguro Shin caused Jago to completely overheat with rage. Fushiguro Shin. Jago roared and chased after the direction of Fushiguro Shin's cursed energy. From Fushiguro Shin's perspective, he hadn't just deceived Inamaki. It was precisely by relying on his deception of Inamaki that he was able to make Jago believe he intended to fight with full strength, thereby tricking him. But how could Fushiguro Shin possibly ignore Megumi Fushiguro's safety and block Jago alone for the sake of everyone else? To Fushiguro Shin, as long as Megumi Fushiguro was safe and sound, it didn't matter even if everyone at Jujutsu High died. Anyone could be deceived, used, or abandoned. When family was placed on one side of the scale, even if the world were to end on the other, it would have nothing to do with Fushiguro Shin. It was only because Fushiguro Shin's own standards were high. In the eyes of the others from Jujutsu High, he had indeed blocked Jago. What's with this vibration? Kamo Noritoshi looked back toward where Fushiguro Shin and Jago were fighting, catching a glimpse of a massive object looming through the thick smoke. This is no time to be looking around. Megumi Fushiguro controlled knew to pull Kamo Noritoshi back, dodging a fatal blow from those massive branches. At that exact moment, Hanami instantly appeared in front of Megumi Fushiguro and threw a heavy punch. Stop! Right then, Inamaki's slightly breathless voice rang out, forcibly interrupting the follow-through of Hanami's attack. But the punch still landed squarely on his chest. The massive impact made Megumi Fushiguro's head spin, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Nu took the initiative to catch Megumi Fushiguro with its body, then immediately grabbed him and flew into the air to evade. Hanami stared at Megumi Fushiguro's state, recalling the latter half of the instructions Geto Suguru had given them. However, that kid Fushiguro Shin has a significant weakness. He cares deeply for his weaker brother, Megumi Fushiguro. If you can't deal with him immediately, beat Megumi Fushiguro half to death and use him as leverage. Note: because of Fushiguro Shin's appearance, Megumi Fushiguro did not become something Sukuna took an interest in. Hanami looked into the distance again, knowing full well that the commotion just now came from Jago's domain expansion's ultimate technique, Meteor. In just the brief moment it was dazed, Itadori's fist came crashing in. You fool! Hanami naturally knew Itadori's identity and had no intention of getting too entangled with him. As it raised its hand, it suddenly felt a terrifying cursed energy appear from behind, far exceeding that of the few in front of it. Fushiguro Shin's cold words rang in Hanami's ear. I have no prejudice against your claims, but you touched someone you shouldn't have. 10 Shadows Technique. Zenoni. 10 Shadows Technique. Zenoni. The effect amplification is similar to Bansho, but it compares the area of the shadow one is in, amplifying based on the difference relative to the shadow the opponent is standing in. Hanami didn't react in time. According to the information it had received, there were no particularly strong individuals among the two Jujutsu High students. The only one who could force Jago to use Domain Expansion's ultimate technique, Meteor, should have been Fushiguro Shin, so how could he be here? In that instant Hanami was dazed. Fushiguro Shin had already swung the cursed tool, bringing the blade down from above Hanami's head. This strike was like cutting through tofu, slicing Hanami completely in half and even leaving a smooth, deep slash in the ground below. Behind Hanami was a tall building, and atop the building were the massive branches it had created. Fushiguro Shin used this large expanse of shadow to easily grant Zenoni a several-fold boost. But that wasn't all. Fushiguro Shin didn't hear that familiar voice ring out. New shadow style. Shadow prison. Shadow prison instantly rose, enveloping the two of them before immediately dispelling. Fushiguro Shin used the shadows left behind by the dispelling of new shadow style. Shadow prison is a medium to deliver a final, strangling blow. 10 Shadows Technique. Linked, Flower Zan. Linked. Combining more than one shadow technique significantly increases consumption. 1 plus 1 equals 4x, 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 9x, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 16x. Consumption follows this pattern. 10 Shadows Technique. Linked, Flower Zan. Allows Cat's Cradle to benefit from Zenoni's output amplification. When the shadow prison enveloping Fushiguro Shin and Hanami vanished, there was no longer an individual in this world that could be called Hanami. All that remained before Fushiguro Shin were fragments of limbs that used to be called Hanami. Successfully killed Hanami, obtained 200,000 experience points. All of this happened far too quickly, the others didn't even have time to wonder why Fushiguro Shin had appeared here. Had this special grade cursed spirit, which had left several of them helpless, just died at Fushiguro Shin's hands. Kamo Noritoshi stared at Fushiguro Shin, almost forgetting to breathe. This was absolute strength, a level of power he might never reach in his entire life. The last time he had felt such despair from overwhelming power was when he first learned of Satoru Gojo's existence. Even when facing Yuta Okatsu, he had never felt such despair. Kamo Noritoshi couldn't help but begin to recall whether he had struck too hard when he was fighting Megumi Fushiguro just moments ago. Ryomen Sukuna's favorability has increased to 25, obtained 800 experience points. And on Yuji Itadori, who was closest to Fushiguro Shin, Sukuna's mouth surfaced on his face as he spoke excitedly. Fushiguro Shin, you really are interesting. At this moment, Fushiguro Shin's condition couldn't be described as particularly good. To ensure he could thoroughly kill Hanami in one go and avoid a 2-on-1 situation later, he had used all of his cursed energy, gambling it on that final strike. Combined with the consumption from the previous battle and the cost of teleporting Inamaki and moving himself, even someone with his level of cursed energy had run dry. But Fushiguro Shin had no interest in exchanging pleasantries with Sukuna. He shouted to Megumi Fushiguro in the air, Megumi. Come here, I'll help heal you. It was at this moment that everyone suddenly felt the surrounding temperature rise abnormally. Furthermore, the buildings around them rapidly erupted into raging flames one after another. Jago watched as the plants originally summoned by Hanami were bit by bit turning into dust and vanishing. He already realized what that burst of cursed energy he had just felt actually meant. Although Jago was not human, he could still feel grief for the departure of a close friend. Back then, it was Hanami who saved him, but now he had no way to save Hanami. Jago glared at Fushiguro Shin in rage and said through gritted teeth, didn't you just ask me how many times I could open my domain? I'll tell you right now, it's more than once. Domain expansion. Coffin of the Iron Mountain. Fushiguro Shin's expression looked grim. Now Megumi Fushiguro and the others were by his side, and all of them were caught in Jago's domain, where scorching heat and erupting magma were the only things present. Fushiguro Shin had no choice but to stake everything on a single throw, directly injecting 50,000 experience points into his physical body to elevate it to the special grade level. Due to this upgrade, under the effect of the two-way heavenly restriction, it was directly converted into special grade cursed energy. Although it was still far from his peak, Fushiguro Shin now had power he could consume for battle. Fushiguro Shin shouted to Megumi Fushiguro, is your cursed energy still okay? Find a way to use your domain to open a gap in his and lead them out of here. Megumi Fushiguro was stunned and asked, brother, what about you? Someone has to hold him back for you to act, I'll stall him. Fushiguro Shin turned and said to Inamaki, that's enough, Inamaki-senpai. You can't help anymore. If you reach your limit now, I'll have to divert my attention to look after you. Inamaki had no choice but to give up on his idea of assisting Fushiguro Shin even at the cost of his life. Inamaki's favorability has increased to 25, obtained 500 experience points. Kamo Noritoshi looked at Fushiguro Shin's back. Although he didn't say much, he certainly took note of this favor. Kamo Noritoshi's favorability has increased to 10, obtained 1000 experience points. Fushiguro Shin saw Jago preparing to use his cursed technique and shouted to Megumi Fushiguro, there's no time, Megumi. Domain expansion. Chimera Shadow Garden. Facing the surging magma controlled by Jago, Fushiguro Shin used his cursed energy reinforced body to force a defense. Despite having the reverse cursed technique for recovery, that blistering pain was still very real. Sukuna's mouth on Yuji Itadori's face asked, why don't you use your own domain, brat? Not everyone is worthy of being my target. Once Megumi Fushigiro's domain neutralized the sure hit effect of Jago's domain. Fushiguro Shin directly engaged Jago in close quarters combat to prevent him from targeting Megumi Fushiguro and the others, but Jago had already seen through this. Jago said sarcastically, "Do you think your little tricks will still work within my domain?" True to Jago's words, in this domain filled with scorching light sources, Fushiguro Shin was unable to utilize shadows effectively for battle. Fushiguro Shin said nothing, silently continuing to grapple with Jago, who was empowered within the domain. "Brother!" Megumi Fushiguro shouted one last time before escaping the domain. Fushiguro Shin simply turned slightly, glanced at Megumi Fushiguro, and revealed a confident smile. "See you outside in a bit." Once Megumi Fushiguro and the entire group had exited the domain, Fushiguro Shin's expression shifted, and his panicked look vanished instantly. "Since they have all left, we can begin." Seeing Fushiguro Shin's transformation, a sliver of unease rose in Jago's heart. "What nonsense are you talking about when you're at death's door?" Information Disclosure Domain. Malevolent Shrine. Based on Fushiguro Shin's mental memories and combined with the facts that occurred in this world. Within this domain, Fushiguro Shin possesses the ability to release the same techniques used by anyone who has ever harmed those with the Fushiguro surname, reflecting the impact and damage they caused to the Fushiguro family. Note: Sukuna's situation is special. The damage he sustained while possessing Megumi Fushiguro's body is also considered his sin. Domain Expansion. Malevolent Shrine. Come on, let's start round 2. Although I certainly can't kill you right now, you definitely won't win. Saying this, Fushiguro Shin accelerated instantly and struck Jago's abdomen with his palm. The moment he made contact with the body, intense flames suddenly erupted. Jago was all too familiar with this curse technique. Ignoring his injuries, he spoke in shock, "Impossible, you can actually use my curse technique." In the current situation, after Jago had opened his domain, his cursed energy was no longer at its peak. On Fushiguro Shin's side, after opening his domain, his cursed energy was also not very abundant. Although he had reached the special grade level, he still had to use the reverse curse technique for healing. His only advantage was the powerful body from the heavenly restriction, especially now that it had been raised to the special grade level. When both reached their limits and their domains collapsed simultaneously, the last thing Fushiguro Shin did was use Shadow Demon to teleport Jago away at the maximum distance. Fushiguro Shin finally said to Jago, "I actually don't hate you for pursuing your ideals, it's just a pity that our positions are different. You are destined to die at my hands, so for now, you cannot die at the hands of Satoru Gojo." Hearing this, Jago was stunned, seeing a completely different person from the arrogant Fushiguro Shin from before. Then, before Satoru Gojo could notice, he was swallowed by the shadow and sent away. Fushiguro Shin wasn't actually bloodthirsty, nor did he hate these cursed spirits who were trying to carry out their ideals. It was just that for his own goals, he needed to become stronger. He was still too far from his final revenge. After entering the battlefield and dealing with the curse user Kamo Noritoshi, Gojo Satoru's first move was to go to Fushiguro Shin's side to check on him. Gojo Satoru looked at Fushiguro Shin, who was surrounded by others, and asked, "Are you okay?" Fushiguro Shin was just catching his breath, using reverse curse technique on himself while calmly stating, "There were 2 special grades. I took care of one of them. The other fled after its domain was dispelled." Gojo Satoru laughed and said, "As expected, you're still incredibly reliable, Shin." Fushiguro Shin did not participate in the subsequent cleanup work. He merely laid out everything he knew. However, he did not disclose the complete details of the battle. Because it involved cursed techniques, no one pressed him too hard on the matter. Due to Jago's actions, nearly the entire Jujutsu High campus had been engulfed in flames, making it very difficult to continue the exchange event. There was also a minor reason. Kamo Noritoshi voluntarily withdrew from participating in any further events of the exchange, regardless of the format. This left Kyoto Jujutsu High, which was already at a disadvantage in numbers, in an even more passive position on this issue. Thus, this exchange event became the only one to end without a clear winner or loser. It was also at this moment, unnoticed by anyone, that the phone Fushiguro Shin had hidden within his shadow began to ring. Fushiguro Megumi's injuries weren't too severe. Before Shoko even arrived, he had already been fully healed by Fushiguro Shin's reverse curse technique. After advising Megumi to practice his domain more often when he had time, Fushiguro Shin hurriedly left. With that day drawing near, Fushiguro Shin still had many things to prepare. In an unoccupied corner, Ultimate Mechamaru was performing emergency repairs on the damage sustained from the fight with Panda. But in an instant, he was enveloped by the shadows beneath his feet. What? When his vision returned, he was already inside a classroom that had been charred black by the great fire. Standing before him was, naturally, none other than Fushiguro Shin, who had used Shadow Demon. Fushiguro Shin. Using Ultimate Mechamaru's field of view, Kokichi Muda stared warily at Fushiguro Shin. He didn't understand what Fushiguro Shin wanted. Fushiguro Shin held up 3 fingers and got straight to the point. 3 things. First, Gojo Satoru has already begun to suspect there's a mole within Jujutsu High and has already informed Utahime Iori. Kokichi Muda's mind was thrown into chaos. He didn't understand what Fushiguro Shin meant. Was this Gojo Satoru testing to see if he was the mole? But that was impossible. In such a short time, how could they have pinpointed him so quickly? Fushiguro Shin continued, second, even if Mahito restores your body for you, there is absolutely no possibility of you surviving in their hands. Hearing this, Kokichi Muda's pupils dilated. Why did Fushiguro Shin know the details of the deal? Third, I am the only one who can help you. Seeing Ultimate Mechamaru's mouth begin to move, Fushiguro Shin spoke first. You must have a device for remote communication, right? Give me a secure copy. You can go back and think about it. Don't be so quick to refuse me. You must have a reason to want to live, don't you? The image of Kasumi Miwa flashed through Kokichi Muda's mind. Fushiguro Shin, just who are you? Seeing that Ultimate Mechamaru was still wary of him, Fushiguro Shin calmly uttered a number. 17 years, 5 months, 6 days. What? That is the amount of cursed energy you, on the day you go to war with them, will be able to obtain from your heavenly restriction. You. Kokichi Muda was utterly stunned into speechlessness. The man before him seemed to know everything about him. I can let you live. After sending Ultimate Mechamaru away, Fushiguro Shin finally took out that backup phone. On the screen was a text message. The sender was a string of garbled characters, not a normal phone number. Fushiguro Shin knew this meant that the person he had previously asked some connections to find discreetly had been located. Even if one tried to trace that garbled phone number, they would find no information associated with it. Because the people Fushiguro Shin had asked for help were not those from Jujutsu High who lived in the light. They were underground connections he had made, more or less, over the years while handling various tasks. Naturally, this included some life-saving favors. When Fushiguro Shin requested some dirty work, they wouldn't refuse. The content of the message was another phone number. This number was much more normal. He didn't dial the number directly. Instead, he quickly tapped on the screen and composed a text message to that number. Do you remember? A few years ago, you once said that besides work and going to hell, you wouldn't do anything else with him. So why is it that only you haven't gone to hell yet? Not long after the message was sent, a reply came from the other end. Who are you? Let's meet at a restaurant. Choose the place you usually use to entertain your employers. On the other end, Kong Shu, looking at the message content on his screen, had already roughly guessed Fushiguro Shin's identity. Although it was just based on a feeling, on the memory of that time when he helped Toji take the young Fushiguro Shin away from the foot of the mountain where Jujutsu High was located. Inside a high-end business dining restaurant, the front desk attendant asked. Sir, do you have a reservation? Kong Shu held up 3 fingers and said, Mr. Kong, party of 3. A well-proportioned waitress nearby spoke up. Mr. Kong, your reserved private room is this way. Please follow me. After entering the private room, Kongshu ordered a few dishes simply and instructed, bring all the dishes out at once when they're ready. Do not enter the room for any other reason. Being a regular customer, the waitress nodded in understanding. Kongshu sat down, poured himself a cup of tea, and spoke to Fushiguro Shin, who had suddenly appeared in the room. I remember when you were a child. You were just like Toji, having no cursed energy due to heavenly restriction. I never imagined you'd be able to awaken a cursed technique. Fushiguro Shin merely said flatly, I have you to thank for that. Fushiguro Shin's meaning, of course, was that it was because of the mission Kongshu gave Toji that led to his death, and because of Toji's death that Fushiguro Shin awakened his system and gained the opportunity to awaken a cursed technique. Kongshu naturally couldn't guess this underlying meaning. But his professionalism as a broker told him that some things weren't necessary to delve into deeply. It was at this moment that a waiter entered the room carrying all the dishes, simultaneously speaking to the man beside him, Sir, it's this room right here. Thank you. That man was in no hurry to sit down. Instead, he stared thoughtfully at Fushiguro Shin's back. Only after the waiter left the room and closed the door did Fushiguro Shin say calmly, Excuse me, Mr. Kenjaku, could you trouble yourself to turn off the light? Kenjaku. Kongshu asked, somewhat puzzled. He didn't understand what Fushiguro Shin meant. Upon hearing the name uttered from Shin Fushiguro's mouth, Kenjaku felt considerable turmoil within. It had been a very, very long time since he had heard anyone else address him by that name. However, Kenjaku did not act according to Shin Fushiguro's instruction. He was well aware that Shin's ability involved shadows, and it was no simple curse technique. Shin had already guessed that the other party wouldn't dare to turn off the lights so easily, so he spoke calmly, it's just to talk with Mr. Kenjaku. I won't harm you. Kenjaku could sense Shin's attitude from his words, and only then, while maintaining high alertness, did he turn off the room's lights. Kenjaku only felt the flow of cursed energy. Within the dark shadows, something was moving rapidly, something was being swiftly severed. After just a few breaths, Shin Fushiguro spoke up, It's done, Mr. Kenjaku. You can turn the lights back on. When Kenjaku turned the room lights back on, Kongshu's figure was nowhere to be seen. Kenjaku sat down and asked calmly, What did you do to him? Shin Fushiguro calmly used a napkin from the table to wipe away a small amount of blood that had inadvertently spilled onto the dining table. Then, pouring tea for Kenjaku, he said, I just sent him to fulfill the promise he made to my father back then. Kenjaku's first impression upon meeting Shin Fushiguro was one of extreme ruthlessness and decisiveness, unlike what one would expect from someone his age. While picking up food with his chopsticks, Shin Fushiguro said, Then I'll get straight to the point. After Hanami died by my hand, your plan to seal Gojo Satoru must have suffered a significant setback, right? Kenjaku asked with a smile, I'm very curious. Where did you learn all this? I'm not quite sure what you mean by sealing Gojo Satoru. For such questions, Shin naturally wouldn't choose to reveal anything, simply continuing on his own. Where I learned it isn't important. I will take over Hanami's role, allowing you to successfully use the prison realm to seal him. How could he know? Prophetic ability. Exposed plans. Betrayal by a cursed spirit. A test from Jujutsu High. In an instant, countless possible explanations flashed through Kenjaku's mind, but recalling the events related to Shin Fushiguro over this period made him dismiss these possibilities. Compared to these possibilities, there was one issue he needed to ascertain first. Kenjaku looked at Shin Fushiguro and asked, Since you know so much, you should be aware, right? You've already caused quite a bit of trouble for my plans. And now, from what position are you discussing these matters with me? Shin Fushiguro's gaze was icy as he tapped the table, enunciating each word, from the position of the eldest son of the Fushiguro family, who will ultimately kill Gojo Satoru to avenge his father. Is that acceptable? The teacher who killed the father, and the student who wants to kill the teacher. How twisted and interesting. Kenjaku's favorability increased to 15. Gained 1,500 experience points. Shin Fushiguro continued to explain, but don't misunderstand. I only share the same goal as you regarding sealing Gojo Satoru. In essence, both you and Gojo Satoru are targets I intend to kill, but not now. Shin's words inevitably piqued Kenjaku's curiosity. He asked, "You want to kill me? Is it because I sent Hanami and the others to kill you?" Shin Fushiguro shook his head. "Because I rescued Mahito from you." Shin Fushiguro still shook his head. Kenjaku stroked his chin and continued questioning, "Could it be, because of that incident where I used Sukuna's finger to test Sukuna's power?" Shin Fushiguro merely shook his head again. Kenjaku could sense the hidden killing intent Shin harbored towards him, but he couldn't understand the reason. The interactions Kenjaku could recall between himself and Shin Fushiguro weren't actually that many. Shin Fushiguro explained calmly, "No need to guess anymore. It's because of some non-existent causality, that's all." Non-existent causality. Kenjaku chewed on this phrase repeatedly in his mind but couldn't grasp its meaning. Once Gojo Satoru is sealed, our cooperation ends immediately. Any problems with that? To be honest, based on his general understanding of Shin Fushiguro's strength, having him replace Hanami's role would naturally pose no problem. Moreover, with Shin Fushiguro's identity, it would be quite a surprise for Gojo Satoru. Furthermore, Kenjaku was also filled with curiosity about Shin Fushiguro's full power. For some reason, Kenjaku could sense that Shin Fushiguro was not on Gojo Satoru's side. As for schemes like planting a spy, that arrogant guy wouldn't stoop to such tactics. Let's proceed as you say, after establishing the relevant binding vows. In the end, both of them established binding vows not to leak each other's information to others. Silently, Shin Fushiguro mouthed a sentence to Kenjaku. Kenjaku understood the words Shin had just spoken, and the ease on his face vanished. He stared at Shin and said, "You." When the restaurant closed, a server opened the private room door. Inside, only the partially eaten dishes and the payment left on the table remained. Related to this was also a dismemberment case in Tokyo the next day, which didn't attract much attention. The victim's body had been ground into a meat paste only identifiable as human tissue. DNA testing revealed the deceased was not a citizen of the country. With no related missing persons reports, the case was soon shelved. In the car, Akira Nida was explaining the details of this incident to Shin Fushiguro and the other three. Unlike the other three who were listening attentively, Shin Fushiguro simply determined, based on the current time and mission location, that this was the 88 bridge incident. Akira Nida didn't feel displeased by Shin's inattentiveness. Shin's achievements were already well known within Jujutsu High. Coupled with Shin's nearly flawless mission record, he was also somewhat famous among the assistant supervisor community. It was commonly said that as long as a mission was assigned to Shin Fushiguro, it basically meant a safe resolution. Akira Nida asked Shin, "Shin, what are your thoughts on the mission?" Shin Fushiguro replied with a smile, "I already have a pretty good idea. This mission might take a bit more time. But let Megumi and you guys investigate first. I can't just leave you with no chance to grow." The so-called bit more time mainly referred to handling it at night. Yuji, still pondering the mission, couldn't help but sigh, as expected of Shin. It's really reassuring. Nobara teased Megumi Fushiguro, "Hey, Megumi, when are you going to become as reliable as Shin? Come on, I'm already in the evaluation process for promotion to grade 1 Jujutsu Sorcerer. It's just that my brother is too strong." Nida Akira looked at Fushiguro Shin, who had not gone into the school with the other three to investigate, and asked, "Shin, aren't you going to investigate with them? Or have you really figured it out already?" Fushiguro Shin explained, "There are clues in the school, but I indeed already know the answer." It was precisely because of Fushiguro Shin's presence that Nida Akira could rarely feel a bit of relaxation while handling such a dangerous mission. In the car, Nida Akira rested his chin on one hand and sighed, "You're truly amazing. If everyone were as capable as you, dealing with curses would be quite easy, wouldn't it?" Nida Akira's favorability has risen to 12, gained 200 experience points. Fushiguro Shin said modestly, "Not really. Actually, everyone is quite capable. Take Megumi, for example, he just needs a little time to grow. I'm really a bit envious of Megumi, having an older brother like you. With your current achievements, it wouldn't be strange if you were graded as a special grade, yet you've always stayed low profile to protect him. I wish I could be like you. Nida Akira thought of his younger brother, who was a first year in Kyoto. Then, he saw a middle-aged man walk out of the school, seemingly saying something to Megumi Fushiguro and the others. Seeing this, Nida Akira remarked, they seem to have run into some trouble. Fushiguro Shin just waved his hand and explained. It's fine. Megumi and I were students here before. Megumi can handle it. After a while, once Megumi Fushiguro had spoken with the middle-aged man, the problem seemed solved, but then a group of students emerged and surrounded him. Megumi Fushiguro seemed a bit troubled as he scratched his head and walked toward the car. Fushiguro Shin rolled down the car window and asked, "What's wrong?" "Everyone says they really want to see you again, big brother." Nida Akira asked, somewhat confused. Everyone. Before he knew it, a crowd of students had gathered around the car, giving Nida Akira a start. Almost in unison, the boys shouted loudly, "Big brother Shin." Fushiguro Shin explained, "When I was studying here, I straightened out the school's atmosphere a little." But as Nida Akira looked at the large crowd, he knew it certainly wasn't as simple as Fushiguro Shin made it out to be. Because of his reverse heavenly restriction, Fushiguro Shin had already unified the school and reached the summit of Urami East Junior High before the delinquents there could even think of bullying Megumi Fushiguro. To provide Megumi Fushiguro with a relatively good learning environment, Fushiguro Shin had also conveniently conquered the surrounding schools, unifying the entire area during his middle school years and becoming a legend in the process. After this little interlude ended, Megumi Fushiguro and the other two, having finished their investigation, returned to the car. Only after listening to the analysis from Megumi Fushiguro and the others did Fushiguro Shin speak up, "Not bad. For you to have investigated to this extent is enough. Leave the rest to me." Megumi Fushiguro was stunned and asked in surprise, "Wait, was our direction wrong?" "The direction wasn't wrong, but if it were you guys, it would still take some time to find the truth. It's better to deal with a special grade sooner rather than later." Special grade. Brother, are you saying the cursed spirit this time is a special grade? That's right. The rest is my job. At night, Fushiguro Shin crossed the small river beneath 88 Bridge. As he expected, he entered the cursed spirit's innate domain. Fushiguro Shin looked at the mole-like cursed spirit poking its head out upside down from the roof of the cave and said flatly, "Sorry, I don't have time to play with you." 10 Shadows Technique. Cat's Cradle. With a snap of Fushiguro Shin's fingers, the shadows throughout the entire domain instantly boiled over, shredding everything to pieces. This included that finger-bearing special grade cursed spirit, which hadn't even begun to move yet. Under Fushiguro Shin's special attention, it was completely killed. As long as he was in an environment shrouded in darkness, Fushiguro Shin was the absolute king of shadows. Under such conditions, even if Satoru Gojo were to come, Fushiguro Shin would give him a show of strength. Because shadows are things that can remain unaffected by the limitless curse technique. This was because Fushiguro Shin's 10 Shadows technique was different from the Zenin family's 10 Shadows technique. The 10 Shadows technique summons Shikigami, whereas Fushiguro Shin utilizes the shadows themselves. And no matter how strong Satoru Gojo might be, he had no way to keep his entire body completely free of shadows. A shadow itself symbolizes a result, it symbolizes the fact that it has already appeared upon something else. Fushiguro Shin used the shadow demon to pick up the finger, and the innate domain that existed because of the cursed spirit began to rapidly collapse. It was at this moment that Kechizu barged in. He looked in astonishment at the crumbling domain and at Fushiguro Shin standing within it. Normally, Kechizu would have made a snide remark about someone else getting there first. But now, he couldn't speak. Kechizu could see that Fushiguro Shin's gaze was already locked onto him, and only 2 words surfaced in his mind: "I'll die." Fushiguro Shin took the initiative to greet him. "Kechizu, you're here." Kechizu scratched his head, momentarily at a loss, completely caught off guard by this development. You know me. Of course. Your brother Eso should be here too, right? Just as Fushiguro Shin spoke, the innate domain completely collapsed, and the scene returned to beneath 88 Bridge. Eso was already standing there, eyeing the current situation with some confusion. Fushiguro Shin held their mission objective, Sukuna's finger, in his hand, but the feeling Fushiguro Shin gave him was extremely dangerous. It seemed that seizing the finger wouldn't be easy. After all, he was a jujutsu sorcerer who had exorcised a finger-bearing cursed spirit. But why was Kechizu's reaction so strange? Kechizu looked at Eso and said, "Brother, this person knows us." Now it was Eso's turn to be dazed. Knowing them as the cursed womb, death paintings, how could such a thing be possible? If possible, young man, please hand over what's in your hand. Suddenly, an object was tossed toward Eso. He instinctively took 2 steps back to dodge it. He then took a combat stance, but Kechizu, who was beside him, spoke up, "Brother, look." Eso calmed down and looked in the direction Kechizu was pointing, finally seeing clearly what had been thrown at him. It was actually their mission objective for this trip, one of Sukuna's fingers. Fushiguro Shin asked, "What? Didn't you come here for Sukuna's finger?" Eso picked up the finger and, after carefully confirming it was the real deal, asked Fushiguro Shin with some bewilderment. "Is it really okay to just hand it over to me like this?" Fushiguro Shin waved his hand and said, "It's fine. I'm not interested in that thing. But since I've given you Sukuna's finger, chat with me for a bit." Kechizu and Eso exchanged glances. They didn't feel any malice from Fushiguro Shin, and they were equally curious as to why the other party knew them. Kechizu's favorability has risen to 2, gained 200 experience points. Eso's favorability has risen to 2, gained 200 experience points. Choso has also obtained a physical body, hasn't he? Fushiguro Shin asked. Kechizu took the initiative to answer, "Yeah, you actually know about Big Brother." "Yeah, I also know that you brothers have a very close relationship." Finally, Fushiguro Shin made his request, "Help me get a message to Choso. Remember to find a time when Suguru Geto and those cursed spirits aren't around. Tell him that I know where Kamo Noritoshi is, and I also know about another younger brother connected to you by blood. Ask him if he'd consider my side instead of the cursed spirits or the jujutsu sorcerers." Hearing about Kamo Noritoshi and another blood-related younger brother, Eso and Kechizu looked at each other. "If possible, don't let Suguru Geto and the others know about our conversation." Kechizu wasn't good at thinking about such things, so he immediately turned his gaze toward Eso. Eso stared at Fushiguro Shin and observed him for a long time before finally nodding. "I understand. I will pass the message for you. So, how should I contact you afterwards? We'll meet again later. At that time, I'll just confirm it with Choso." After Fushiguro Shin finished answering, he proactively closed his eyes. Just as Eso was feeling confused, Fushiguro Shin explained, "Traveling backwards is quite a hassle, isn't it? I won't look." He knew about his situation. To think he would just close his eyes like that, wasn't he worried about a sneak attack at a time like this? Eso's favorability increased to 5, gained 300 experience points. The reasons for choosing to save Kechizu and Eso were quite complex. On one hand, Fushiguro Shin naturally felt a certain affinity for this kind of brotherhood. On the other hand, he intended to learn blood manipulation from Choso. Finally, it was to obtain information on Kenjaku and the need for someone to act in his stead to provide a certain level of protection for Sumiki and Megumi Fushiguro. No matter how strong Fushiguro Shin was alone, he was still just one person. There were some things he couldn't manage perfectly, especially regarding certain things he was about to do, which he couldn't inform the people at Jujutsu High about. The upcoming Shibuya incident was a critical juncture for Fushiguro Shin. Averted the deaths of Kechizu and Eso, gained 20,000 reward points. Satoru Gojo was in his office, continuously dropping sugar cubes into his coffee one by one. "So, you judged from the very beginning that the situation over there wasn't normal." "Yes, I can't explain the specifics clearly, but it was just a feeling, the sense of incongruity that comes with the appearance of a special grade cursed spirit. After a brief moment of thought, Satoru Gojo didn't press further. It wasn't that big of a deal anyway, and besides, it had already been resolved by Fushiguro Shin. But Satoru Gojo still couldn't help teasing. Could it be that you have a constitution that attracts special grade cursed spirits, Shin? Fushiguro Shin countered directly, if that were the case, I'd definitely produce one capable of killing you. Instead of hoping for something like that, you should focus more on your own growth. I don't need you to remind me of that. I will definitely kill you with my own hands. This kind of dialogue was basically just a daily occurrence whenever only Satoru Gojo and Fushiguro Shin were present. To this, Satoru Gojo only responded with a smile. He had long since grown accustomed to it. After all, the causality connecting the two of them was such a twisted existence. I'm taking a few days off to go see a friend. It's quite rare for Shin to take the initiative to ask for leave. Anyway, it won't be long before my evaluation changes to first grade or special grade. By then, the number of missions will only increase. It shouldn't be a problem to have one last bit of free time to rest, right? Hearing this, Satoru Gojo nodded repeatedly. This was, of course, very reasonable. Fushiguro Shin thought for a moment and deliberately emphasized. If I encounter any troublesome incidents, I'll handle them in passing. Thanks for the hard work. Fushiguro Shin thought to himself that this would be fine. Having it on the record publicly would provide a formal excuse when the time came. It was at this moment that there was a knock on the office door. It was the trio of Megumi Fushiguro and the others called by Satoru Gojo. The purpose of calling them was, naturally, regarding the mole in Kyoto. Brother, is the matter at 88 Bridge resolved? Megumi Fushiguro asked. Fushiguro Shin brushed past Megumi Fushiguro, patted his shoulder, and said, naturally. I'm leaving now. You'd better work hard. Yeah. After briefly informing the three about the mole, Satoru Gojo arranged for them to meet up with Iori Utahime. As the three left Satoru Gojo's office, Kugasaki looked at the gloomy Megumi Fushiguro and asked, what's wrong with you? Megumi Fushiguro murmured to himself, I just feel like, since that time, the opportunities to see my brother have become much fewer. Kugasaki gave him a look as if he were an idiot. Please, with his kind of strength, it would be a waste for him to keep hiding his power and stay by your side just to protect you. Yuji Itadori also agreed with this statement. After all, he had witnessed Fushiguro Shin's strength several times and knew that when Sukuna was acting up inside him, Fushiguro Shin had also intervened to suppress him, preventing any disastrous consequences. As for Shin, if we move with him, we're just a burden. He can save more people on his own. Kokichi Muda, covered in bandages, looked at the two people entering the room and said dissatisfiedly. You're too slow. I thought you'd forgotten. The people who arrived were none other than Suguru Geto and Mahito. Mahito pinched his nose and said, I really should just kill him now. The smell of mildew here is truly disgusting. I know you want to overcome your fear of Fushiguro Shin by killing a student from Jujutsu High, but you should have personally experienced the effects of the binding vow by now, right? How troublesome. We need to finish his treatment before we can kill him. Although I hoped he would contribute in Shibuya later, there's no helping it, Suguru Geto said, spreading his hands. No attacking people from Kyoto Jujutsu High. You guys were the ones who broke the binding vow first, weren't you? Jago only attacked to kill Fushiguro Shin. Those people were too weak and got caught up in it. How can you blame us? You shouldn't take your anger out on us, Mahito said, clearly indifferent. Suguru Geto crossed his arms over his chest and urged impatiently, alright, let's get started. Let's not drag this out for too long. Alright, I get it. Mahito impatiently pressed his hand onto Kokichi Muda's head and used idle transfiguration on him, restoring his body. Mahito asked, so, this counts as the end of the binding vow, right? Yeah. Mahito immediately activated his domain. Domain expansion. Self-embodiment of perfection. Kokichi Muda hadn't expected the opponent to activate a domain immediately. Seeing Kokichi Muda's stunned expression, Mahito explained. Thanks to a certain someone, I've learned not to give the enemy any chances. Do you have any last words? Because Mahito used domain expansion right from the start, all the preparations he had made were too late to be deployed, and he had no chance to use them. Even the ultimate Mekamaru absolute mode couldn't be utilized. Kokichi Muda knew very well what it meant to be trapped in Mahito's domain. But he was unwilling. He had paid such a high price to finally restore his body. There were still things he hadn't done, and he still hoped to see everyone again. Originally, he wouldn't have been like this. It was after Fushiguro Shin communicated with him that day that he wanted to live even more. Help me. Mahito was stunned for a moment by the faint sound coming from Kokichi Muda's mouth, then laughed mockingly. What? Is that a plea for help? Who could possibly save you now? Ha 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 ha. Kokichi Muda roared with a trembling, exhausted voice. Help me, Shin. You said you could let me live. From Kokichi Muda's shadow, a person slowly emerged, the nightmare that had been haunting Mahito until now. I have received your request. New shadow style. Shadow prison. Instantly, Mahito's domain was completely covered by a cage of shadows. Shadow. Shadow. Long time no see. Mahito. Let's continue. Kenjaku, standing outside the domain, clearly felt that sudden explosion of terrifying cursed energy. Although Kenjaku already had an answer in his heart, he was in no hurry to act, waiting until Mahito's domain shattered. A spherical object almost grazed Kenjaku's head and slammed violently against the wall behind him. With a thunderous boom, the wall itself cracked and crumbled. That object was Mahito's head, which had been severed by Fushiguro Shin. Fushiguro Shin took Kokichi Muda and merged into the shadows. Fushiguro Shin mouthed to Kenjaku, I'm taking him. In exchange, I didn't kill Mahito. It's too early for you, isn't it? Fushiguro Shin. Kenjaku merely muttered as he lifted the curtain. There was no point in wasting time with Fushiguro Shin now. Leaving Kokichi Muda to Fushiguro Shin wouldn't be too big of a problem. After all, because of the cooperation between him and Fushiguro Shin, there was no need to worry about any accidents occurring with the sealing of Satoru Gojo. It could only be said that more consideration was needed regarding what Fushiguro Shin would do after that. Kenjaku had to admit that Fushiguro Shin was indeed a sharp sword, but unfortunately, this double-edged sword also had the potential to wound its wielder. After a period of shadow traveling, Fushiguro Shin reached the designated location before his cursed energy was completely exhausted. Kokichi Muda looked at this familiar room, which was empty except for a single chair. Only now did he truly feel certain that he had escaped from Mahito's domain and temporarily shaken off Geto Suguru and Mahito. Kokichi Muda looked at his hands, which were trembling slightly with excitement, as Fushiguro Shin's voice rang out. They shouldn't come looking for you again for a short while. Mahito will likely need some time to recover in that state, and besides, they have other things to prepare for. Because from Fushiguro Shin's perspective, Kokichi Muda knew about Kenjaku and the others' arrangements regarding Shibuya. Some of their communication did not violate the binding vow he had made with Kenjaku. Kokichi Muda looked at Fushiguro Shin and finally asked the question. Fushiguro Shin, who exactly are you? Fushiguro Shin straightened his clothes and replied calmly. Fushiguro Shin, the eldest son of the Fushiguro family. What do you mean? Fushiguro Shin didn't answer Kokichi Muda's question but continued on his own. In any case, from now on, you need to follow my instructions. First and foremost, you are forbidden from leaking anything about us or the information regarding Shibuya to the outside world. What? You want to hide their plan? Why? Kokichi Muda was extremely bewildered. I can't tell you the reason. You can think of me as a third-party existence outside of Jujutsu High and the cursed spirits. A third party. I'm different from those cursed spirits. I can promise you that none of your acquaintances from Kyoto Jujutsu High will be harmed, and Jago, Dagon, and Mahito will all die in Shibuya because of me. Fushiguro Shin paused and continued. Furthermore, I can guarantee that no matter what happens, you will have nothing to do with the whole affair and will remain absolutely innocent. I just need you to use your puppet manipulation technique to scout and relay information for me, and while you're at it, protect an ordinary person for me. That's all. Kokichi Muda fell into a long silence, repeatedly mulling over the words Fushiguro Shin had just thrown out. It seemed that aside from not knowing Fushiguro Shin's intentions and being unable to make the information about Shibuya public, there was nothing disadvantageous for him. Kokichi Muda finally made up his mind and asked Fushiguro Shin. So, who is it that you want me to protect? Family. Besides Megumi, my other important family member. When Fushiguro Shin mentioned his family, Kokichi Muda saw an expression on his face that wasn't his usual one, which, while not making people feel disliked, always kept others at a distance. It was a gentle expression that clearly came from the heart. Family, huh? Kokichi Muda muttered to himself. He decided to trust Fushiguro Shin this once, whether it was because he had truly saved him or because of his absolute strength. Kokichi Muda's favorability increased to 10. Gained 1000 experience points. Kokichi Muda survived, reversing his fated death. Gained 10,000 experience points. Fushiguro Shin heard the system's notification and naturally understood Kokichi Muda's choice. It was at this moment that the iron door of the small room was violently attacked, and the door flew straight toward Fushiguro Shin. But in this dark room, Fushiguro Shin simply snapped his fingers, and the iron door turned into a pile of iron filings on the ground. Bursting through the door were Yuji Itadori, Megumi Fushiguro, and Nobara Kugasaki, led by Iori Utahime, who had been asked by Satoru Gojo to investigate the mole incident at Kyoto Jujutsu High. Shin. Itadori spoke in surprise. Fushiguro Shin thought of something and said, "Wait, don't come in yet." But the three outside the door rushed in immediately upon hearing Shin's voice. What they saw was Fushiguro Shin using his body to shield Kokichi Muda. Because Mahito had just used idle transfiguration to treat Kokichi Muda before the battle broke out, Kokichi Muda was currently completely naked, save for some bandages covering necessary areas. Nobara Kugasaki looked at the situation before her. A dark little room, Fushiguro Shin with an exposed male. A plot of several thousand words couldn't help but pop into her head. She pointed at Fushiguro Shin in shock and said, what on earth are you two doing? Fushiguro Shin gave a bitter laugh and complained, that's why I told you to wait. But Iori Utahime was different. She looked at that somewhat unfamiliar face. She was naturally very aware of Kokichi Muda's condition. She asked tentatively, Kokichi Muda. It's me, Kokichi Muda nodded slightly. Megumi Fushiguro asked in surprise, brother, why are you here? Fushiguro Shin explained, I made an appointment with him to come see him in my spare time, to see if there was any way to treat the physical problems caused by his heavenly restriction. Iori Utahime spoke in immense shock, in other words, you healed him. Kokichi Muda listened carefully to the conversation between Fushiguro Shin and these people. Because it happened so suddenly, they hadn't had time to come up with a good excuse regarding his physical recovery. Probably because we both have heavenly restrictions, I could understand his physical damage. I tried using the reverse curse technique, and I didn't expect it to succeed. But for now, let's find him some clothes. After Kokichi Muda controlled a puppet to bring him a set of clothes, Fushiguro Shin continued to ask. Speaking of which, why are you all here? The group glanced at each other, not knowing how to answer for a moment. Iori Utahime finally sighed and said straightforwardly, we are investigating the matter of a mole within Jujutsu High. Fushiguro Shin turned back, feigning shock. Are you suspecting him? He mouthed to Kokichi Muda. Remember what I told you. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.